Ever ask yourself, where do the towers go? Dr. Judy Wood, ICU Psyop Recovery Program, addressing your questions, your curiosities, your mysteries regarding that fateful day.
Didn't hear it, you didn't see it, you won't see nothing, no one, never in your life, you never heard it. How sad it all seems without any proof.
You got far.
You didn't hear it, you didn't see it, you never heard it, not a word of it. You won't see nothing, no one, never tell a soul what you know is the truth.
ICU Psyop Recovery Program. It's a character-driven production on Guerrilla Media Network. If you can handle the truth, tune in.
In the ICU Psyop Recovery Room with Dr. Judy Wood and her special guest this week, Julia Davis. I'm going to say hi to both of you and make sure you're both there. I think you are. Hi.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's fascinating, and a lot of this information and a lot of these images that we saw yesterday were completely new to me, so I'm very excited to see more and find out what Dr. Wood had been able to uncover and the conclusions she arrived to.
Well, yesterday we had a video that wouldn't play, and I was dying to play it because it's just a site looking up West Broadway, what I often call the swamp. Here you go. We're going to notice in here all the window glass is missing in the affected areas, missing door handles and toasted engines and toasted other things in the car. Just witness what you see here. So there's some missing door handles, window glass completely, even the seal around the driver's window. I don't know what happened in there. I mean, how would you describe that?
And just mangled.
3, 2. Oh, man. More debris falling from a nearby building, the World Trade Center, to the West Broadway of Berkeley. Very difficult to breathe here, but look around. This must have been ground zero where this thing blew up. Car after car after car. Buses completely obliterated and burned straight down to the steel. Behind me?
Burned completely down to the steel. I don't know how much steel it was there. It didn't look burned, but something happened to it. Toasted. Okay, then we left off at 107. So let's see if we can just zip through here. This is probably the easier way to get there. We saw the toasted car lot before, during, and after. And we were going to go to weird fires. Now, hot things glow, but not everything that glows is hot. That often gets people. Like bombs go boom, and not everything that goes boom is a bomb. For example, an egg in a microwave oven. Or a balloon. The balloons pop. But hot things do glow, and things that aren't hot also glow. Like a fluorescent light bulb versus an incandescent light bulb. They both glow, but for different reasons. One is a resistance heater, and then the other is a plasma type arrangement. So we might see something orange and glowing, and sometimes they call it, Cheetos, as in the snack food Cheetos. I think they call them Wetsits in England. Just to note that it's just orange in color, so we don't automatically assume a conventional fire. And along that road, that's West Broadway. I often call the swamp because, it looks like a swamp. And there's the vehicles there. All of them, for that distance, were toasted in some way. And here's the beginning of it. We have Patrick Conley, his firefighter, came out of that door. Let's see if I can get my ink color. What color do I want? Maybe I'll get bright blue. There I go. Oh, I have to make sure I have the highlighter. There's the door. Anyway, Patrick Conley went in there while one of the towers was coming apart, and it didn't look like a place he wanted to stay. he saw the basement, there was supposed to be a shelter, looked in disarray, and so he came back out, but then it was pitch black. He couldn't see his hand in front of his face. And then he said, well, thank goodness that car went up in flames, because then he could see where he was. Now let's recall the timing. The building was coming apart. He'd come apart, and he ducked in there for a safe place to hide, came out, everything was pitch black because the dust had gone up and blocked out 100% of the sunlight for some period of time, a few minutes at least, and then that car lit up. The car didn't light up during the destruction of the tower, but immediately after the dust cloud had rolled by. So the dust cloud didn't cause it. It was right after that. And here's point A right down here. That's where he was. But are you going to say that this is burning debris that fell down and lit those cars on fire? So is the burning debris only going to fall down into that canyon? And notice it's not on the rooftops of adjacent buildings. You don't see debris on top of the roofs here. Those roofs are pretty clear. And you can see from the shiny street right up to that point, the E intersection, that it's all shiny from fire hoses and so forth. And after that, it looks like powder. All up and down Greenwich, it looks like it's just powder. Now, Patrick Conley describes walking up to intersection C, then going over to intersection D. And when he passed that intersection, he described all the cars lighting up. And by golly, here's some of those cars. Now, we have some firefighters who are just going for a lunch break. Here they are. Do-do-do, ho-hum. They're not concerned about a car blowing up. Isn't that peculiar? They're just nonchalantly walking through there. And here we have all of this unburned paper. This is also West Broadway here. And that looks like the toasted bus down there toasting away. Tremendous, sea of paper here that doesn't seem to be burning. Same with this situation in the video. And on the left, often folks say, I see hot molten metal. Well, wait a minute, that's paper, isn't it, right here? So I need a better color here. Thought it was blue. Yeah, there you go. Darker. But that looks like paper, and it's what I call these Cheetos over here. They look like, snack food Cheetos. I don't know what those are. They're glowing. Doesn't necessarily mean they're hot. Think of a fluorescent tube that might be bent, or a neon tube that's bent. It wouldn't be hot, but it would be glowing like that. But who knows what that is? But this isn't molten metal, because molten means, liquid. And because that's not a flat pool, horizontal pool. But also, we have aluminum cladding. We can identify that from the buildings. Aluminum alloy melts at slightly under, pure aluminum is 660 centigrade. Aluminum alloy is slightly under that. And iron melts at 1535 centigrade. A lot higher. So if that's hot molten iron, why isn't the aluminum melted? And here we have a plastic trash can and an igloo cooler. They don't seem to be melted. And if the fire is white hot, it's like 1200 degrees centigrade or higher. So what's going on there? And there's a nice audio. I think this is the one with Jesse Ventura on here. Let's get familiar with the temperatures. Often the folks in the truther movement talk about these temperatures. This was the original Cheeto that I talked about. That's not quite the right color to highlight it with, but right there with my thing is. It looks like a bent piece of something that's glowing. It's uniform color, which is really strange. And would those hydraulics be working if it was all that hot? If this thing has been digging, you're going to say something?
No, it definitely wouldn't be working right if it was melting.
82 degrees centigrade is the highest temperature with the best fluids and all. For hydraulics before permanent damage, and we didn't hear about all the hydraulics, having a problem. And if this thing is digging something up, it's obviously got the jaws down in whatever it is that would be hot, if it were hot. But my question is, It's picked this thing up. Where's it taking it? To the dumpster? If we look at the color, that's at least, up in here, which is, probably around 1,000 degrees centigrade. But, that's where aluminum melts, down there. So, this, up here, this white hot, that's what this would be over in here, if it's glowing because it's hot. And that's a big if. And there's also this corner of this aluminum cladding that we'll look at closer later, that if that's glowing, if aluminum is glowing because it's hot, that means it's got to be a puddle. If it melts at 650, or approximately centigrade. I'm assuming it's aluminum alloy. So looking back at the temperatures again. Here's what I call Cheetos over here. And a blow-up of this area is over to the right. It looks like it could be glowing, that end of that aluminum cladding. And if that is glowing because it's hot, that aluminum better be a puddle. But if it's glowing for some other reason, it can glow because it's not hot, there's something else going on there.
We have the videotapes. The firefighters reporting molten metal like a slurry or a steel mill or a volcano. Those are quotes. What
about the pictures of them dragging oxygen hoses all over the steaming supposed hot metal? If it were that hot, you wouldn't dare do that, would you?
Well, we do have the infrared photos of the molten metal.
Well, again, what melted the metal? Was it heat?
Well, a few times you ever heard, I think it's the only time I've ever heard Alex Jones speechless.
Yeah, it actually sounds like it's some technical problem because that never happens.
I walked away saying, you wouldn't dare do that now, would you? Would you? Would you be this guy at the end of that hose? Right there with the cutter torch? And then an oxygen hose that's draped across, hot molten metal?
No, definitely not.
They look, they'd look more like grilled cheese sandwiches if they were, if it was that hot. So we know that fuming, say you'd look like steamed clams if that was really hot.
And
you wouldn't get
the smoke doesn't look like the fire smoke either.
It's just like fumes coming from something, like,
yes. It does look like it fumes during a chemical reaction more than fire smoke.
And we saw how there was wet dirt dumped all over the ground and it was still coming up through that. So there's something strange. And if it were that hot, this picture up in the upper left-hand corner is a famous one that everyone tends to quote, not everyone, but many of the truthers quote, saying proof of it was hot. Well, this point E here, that's pointing to right in front of that little stub that was left of Building 3 is right about there. And point E is right in front of it. And here you can see that little stub of Building 3 that's left, and here's point E in front of it. And they claim from this color map that it's 819 Fahrenheit there. For people who are familiar with Fahrenheit, 212 is where the water boils, and 819 is a much bigger number than that. So if this guy's walking through water that hot, he should look like a boiled chicken.
Yeah, it would be like a lobster pot in there. They wouldn't just be walking in.
And he doesn't seem distressed. And there's a guy over here. I point to that little piece of metal because you can see it here, and that is the same fellow there that was in the dash box, over there. You could match the parts to know that you are in front of Building 3. There's Building 3, or the remains of it. There was a water main that broke out in the middle of West Street after the demise of the towers on that afternoon. And here again, those wheat checks that were stabbed in the ground that were in the background of the famous flag image. And so we're looking at that same scene. The flag image was after the water drained from the lake. And there's also a picture from point F right there. It looks like a hot spot. You can see this is the remains of Building 4, kind of right in. Whoops, I'm not very good with the area there. This is the remains of Building 1 and the remains of Building 2. And that F point is a hole there. A picture of some guys walking down a ladder, and there's a puddle of water at the bottom. So it's whatever. I'm not saying this is photoshopped. I'm saying that that color does not represent heat. It could represent something else, some other kind of energy that's so activated. And this is looking up West Broadway, the swamp up near the dry end. Nice bushy trees over here and over here. The trees weren't very affected. Neither was the paper. But the vehicles, like this poor car here, something happened with his engine, and it looks like his wheels are right to the ground, like the tires got toasted. And this one, the rear tire looks toasted here, and it's down on the ground. Almost looks as though where the tire gets toasted off and the rim hits the ground, it kind of, grounds out. Look that way to you?
That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, actually, what it looks like.
You see these, light poles and various light poles that are potted down in the concrete. They're grounded. Mm-hmm. Buildings are grounded. Cars are not grounded. If there's some sort of an atmospheric change where there's some kind of charge that builds up in the cars and they can't discharge fast enough, they're can sort of discharge some, but the cars would be affected more than anything if that were the case. And it seems like once a tire goes away and the rim hits the ground, the car's grounded and it stops toasting.
Makes sense.
And here's the intersection that Patrick Connolly came through. And how does fire get in the car? You come with a locksmith? Again, no tires, it's right down to the ground. And you get these Cheetos-looking things on the ground. And they're all uniform glowing. If you're dropping something that really is hot and glowing, a piece of metal, it's tapered. Where it's cooler, it's not quite as bright orange, but this is like uniform orange. But the paper isn't burning. You see all this paper on the ground here that isn't burning. And I tweaked the contrast so you can see this area over here on the side. On the side of the van, the outside of the van. This is something I've seen in other places too, just a side fire, like on the side of the metal. This is a video you'll see during the cleanup where something appears to go into spontaneous combustion. Yeah, see it there. We'll see a close-up of it right after that. You don't see a difference in the fumes. It's just like it lights up. It's not associated with flames pouring out. And actually the firefighters, when they were putting out car fires, it's kind of like they do that if they didn't have anything else to do, that water initially had no effect on the car fires.
Well, that too is pretty telling, because if there were actual fires, water would have some effect.
Yes, exactly. The plot thickens. This next one was repeated over and over again as though folks believed it without stopping to think about it. These FEMA workers, they're not material scientists. They heard somewhere that the steel-toed boots of the workers were melting. We didn't ever hear about, feet cooking inside. But
The women go in and out of Ground Zero up to 10 times a night, often until 2 in the morning, delivering whatever it is rescue workers need to do their jobs. like the ones working in the hotspots.
Steel-toed boots is one of the biggest things.
Steel-toed boots?
Steel-toed boots. Out still on the rubble, it's still, I believe, 1,100 degrees. The guy's boots just melt within a few hours, and they're burning their feet.
Well, if my steel oven is melting, the turkey inside is more than well done. But this is, people, humans tend to keep asking questions till they're given an answer, and they run with it. They don't stop to think if it makes sense. Like George Stephanopoulos, that was the best, answer he got, and he ran with it. And these gals, probably the same thing. And the truther movement was repeating this over and over again, emphasizing, hot molten metal. And people came to start visualizing hot molten metal in their minds. But if you have workers out on the rubble field, you can't call it a pile. That puts the wrong image in people's minds. Out in the rubble field, or the debris field, can you walk across your grill? I mean, you'd burn your steak if it was 1,100 degrees.
Yeah.
Your backyard grill.
Yeah.
So it's strange that someone would repeat that temperature, and that isn't enough for steel to melt. But something what they've captured is that something is going on with the boots. The boots are disintegrating for some reason. There's actually some firefighters who just got out in the nick of time, dove under a fire truck, and then Bobby Newman comes running out. He dives under. And they said they knew he was the last man out. He just got out by the skin of his teeth because his shoes were blown clean off him. That's a weird statement. How does a firefighter come out of a fire, a collapsing building, wherever he's coming from, without his shoes on? But his shoes came off as he was heading out of the building. It's kind of weird. And there's other testimony like that. There's a fellow who called his spouse from inside Tower 1 and said, honey, I don't think I'm going to make it. Tell the kids I love you. Tell the kids I love them and take good care of them. And I don't think I'm going to make it out because my shoes just disintegrated or just melted. And poof, then the building went. And I got to think of this image when I was a little tyke. There was a thunderstorm or something, and there was a power line down, and it was still alive. And some guy was walking along with his girlfriend, went to lift the wire out of his girlfriend's way, and, I didn't see the body, but I saw the burnt shoe prints on the curb where he got fried. Why were his shoe prints toasted into the curb? I think it's because that's where the grounding took place. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So I'm wondering if that's what the deal is with the shoes. Something is still in the atmosphere, a charge is building up, and that's where it goes through. And Rudy Giuliani had an interesting story to say.
There were fires of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit below the ground. I could be standing here, and you could be standing there. And I could be describing to you, Governor, the site, and then a fire would break out in between us. And it was just by luck or the design of God that we weren't killed.
2,000 degrees.
Who was measuring the temperature while this was all happening?
So I think these people don't think, or they just assume and run with it. It's kind of like a field of deer where one of them gets spooked and they all start running. And only one of them knows why they're running, at best. Only one of them knows. And he may not even know. And they just go with it because split-second decision might mean your life. And this is instinct. And so if somebody else said it and somebody else says it again, it repeats and repeats and repeats, and pretty soon everyone's saying it where no one's ever thought through if it makes sense or not. But apparently there's something going on. You saw that apparent spontaneous combustion. Didn't mean that was fire. It was some weird reaction, perhaps. I didn't see any flames coming out of it. I couldn't see what was burning. That during the cleanup, that bright flash that lit up.
Right.
And it could be that, seeing what looked like melted metal. They just made these assumptions. I think it's 2,700 Fahrenheit to melt iron. So we're going to get a little bit of a taste of proof of concept, and also rolled up carpets. That's giving your new information a test drive. Your new ability to see and see if things make sense to you. Whoops. All right. So here we are at the site. Now, you told me that building buckled, the WTC-2. Was it straight? Or we were told that this buckled, but these columns are still standing like, straight like soldiers. So something doesn't make sense here, and this is straight. You see a problem?
Yeah, it definitely doesn't add up.
Other than a lack of material. And notice these wooden platforms out here, where they put what I call mega cranes. And they have to lean over. The bathtub wall goes along somewhere in here and down that way. So they have to be a certain distance back from that wall and reach over. They can't be within X number of feet of each other. They developed these rules because they realized on the first day or two that the cranes were damaging the bathtub wall, even though 2 500,000-ton buildings slamming to the ground didn't. All right, the outer columns, those wheat checks, 3 columns wide, 3 stories tall, held part of the one end of the floor span, and the other part of the floor span was held by the inner columns. And if you have, this collapsing down, too much load, down on that floor from above floors smashing onto it, an overload's going to cause the beam to bend, the columns to bend that way. The wheat checks would be essentially bending over about a horizontal axis. And if it's a large clocking force, like, pile driver, you'd have this large lateral displacement here. So let's look at how we find the deformed wheat checks. Oops. Here's one wheat checks here. Looks like it's curled around the vertical axis. What's wrong with this picture? If you step on a soda pop can to smash it, you know how it's in a circle? The circle doesn't just get tighter. It crumples, the profile of it, which would be back and forth. It wouldn't be curled up around the vertical axis. I call this one on the left, I call that the lasagna noodle. Okay, in statics class, draw a free-body diagram of that beam or column and show the loading on it that would cause that kind of deformation. I think it'd have to be like a curling ribbon or something, but that still doesn't explain. It splits along here through that seam. And here's some more of those wheat checks. The columns are fairly straight, but they're curled around the vertical axis of the building. And these core columns, these are very robust, beefy beams, core columns, and they're curled more than 180 degrees. How do you get that? And also, they don't have any kind of, cracks here in the bend. It's pretty peculiar. It looks like the seam also of this is also split. And Banker's Trust, right across the street from Tower 2, it was said to have had no fires in it. So, how do you explain this beam? Here's one with the see-through holes in it. Let's draw a free-body diagram. If you have buckling, you have these different modes of buckling. How in the heck do you get this?
Very unusual.
It sort of looks like, Christmas ribbon candy. It's not really sharp bends. It's like you get with buckling. And this inside webbing looks, kind of like this. It's just like bowed out. A little bit of a taste of the proof of concept. We're going to find some parallel evidence. We have this curled up beam. You want to see another one just like it? Well, something like it. This is something someone did in their lab, which is their apartment, a bedroom in their apartment. They have the knobs and so forth in the next room of various pieces of equipment. Notice you don't have any cracking through that curve. A little bit of wadding up there, but it's not really like a buckling you would get from, or cracking you would get from a mechanical deformation. It just has this loop-de-loop. That's pure molybdenum, and it's about 2.5 or 3 inches in diameter. And I saw this. I stumbled upon this guy's blog and thought, whoa, I got to go see this guy. And so I wrote to him. I sent him this photograph. So I'd seen some stuff on the web that people were saying that some strange things happened in his neighborhood. So I asked him, did your neighborhood ever get to looking like this? We have a toasty SUV here, and it looks almost like it's shrunken in the front end. And then we have this flip car. It looks like it's in good shape. It's just got the tires aimed in the wrong direction. They should be going down rather than up. It's in the same parking spot you'd expect to be in. Here we have all of the marble facade is missing. But we don't have really any stab wounds in the building. No beams or columns stabbed through it. You have windows like this that are, the outer pane is broken, but not the inner pane. And then you have ones like this where it looks like somebody took a soldering iron and melted a hole through the window. And here too, you'll notice that there's more of them, but these strange rounded holes in the windows. And here's another one where you get the outer pane. Not very good at drawing with this. The outer pane is gone, but they're busted up, and they're not busted the same way. And here's about levitation, more testimony from 9/11. There's David Henshaw was standing at the base of Tower 2 when it went away, and he talked about being picked up and carried a block. So and then there's another video right behind it.
So parking down, I was across the street, and I picked up the camera just out of habit. And something in the back of my mind said, run, run, run. And never in 20 years of shooting in New York have I run from an assignment. But something in the back of my head just said, run. And as I hit the corner of Liberty Street, it was almost being picked up by a tornado, almost being picked up by me. It was like being picked up by a black cloud. That black cloud had substance. It was like night, but it had a solid feel to it. It was like gravel, hot gravel, and just picked me up and tossed me about a block. At 1 second I was running, and the next second I was airborne. And I lost my glasses, I lost my cell phone, I lost my pager, but managed to hold on to both cameras. But it threw you for a block. I was back down at Ground Zero last week and walked the area where I have a pretty good recollection of where I was and where I wound up. And it was just under a city block. It was this blast of warm air. It wasn't hot. It was warm. And it picked me up and threw me up against the wall of the building. You were picked up off the ground. Physically picked up off the ground.
I remember an explosion. At that point, I got knocked out. I don't remember anything. Then I got up, and I looked out the window because the windows exploded, and the street below caved in.
It's pretty interesting there. There's also an EMT who was floated down along a staircase, and the only way that she could rationalize it is that she thought she must have died and God carried her down the stairs. Because how else could she have floated down the stairs? That was the only thing that she could, reason out from the information she had. People try to fit it into their life experiences. And here's the person I went to visit was John Hutchison. Here's a toy boat experiment. There's a plastic boat, and he's got water droplets floating up there, and more of a trail of them coming up. And a lot of folks like to say, smear him on the internet and say, he can't reproduce it, but he's got 2,000 pounds of samples. A lot of different samples, so it's kind of clear he can reproduce it. But also, how do you? Or he does it with a magnet and puts the camera in a cardboard box and turns it upside down. But how do you hold water up with a magnet? So, we're going to talk about the weather. Good time to talk about the weather, isn't it? Good accident investigation, you got to cover everything. It's a car wreck, you want to write down whether or not it was a wet surface or if it's raining or foggy. So let's look at the weather. Now, 10 minutes to 15 minutes before the North Tower got its hole, for the first event of the day, this was on the TV set, TV broadcast. This fellow on Fox is describing this high-pressure system moving from the west eastward. And then on CBS they're talking about, some rough seas, but it's going to be as nice as can be in Manhattan. Just reassure you, it's going to be as nice as can be. Also, notice that there's thunder all around the perimeter of the country around this high-pressure system that covered the entire continent. It's kind of interesting. Notice this is Hurricane Aaron. Meet Hurricane Aaron. This is a day or two before 9/11. Here's the front of that high-pressure system. And there's this hurricane that had been moving straight towards New York for 4 days. Now, there's something else it looks like. It's something that just happened recently. So let's look at this. You see that? It's Hurricane Sandy, they called it. They call it the baseball and bat image. You got one system running into another system, one long one running into a round one. But we didn't hear about Hurricane Aaron. And actually, a lot of people think they didn't hear about it, which is quite interesting. There's Geraldo Rivera, just 2 years ago, was celebrating 40 years of reporting on hurricanes, and nary a hurricane does he miss.
Morning. People ask me why I have been so attracted over the years to hurricane coverage. But there's risk involved. There is, the peril of not knowing what's going to happen, that adventure, and it's pitting yourself against an enemy. It's like war, only no one is shooting at you specifically. That's with the little bit. There is nary a storm that I am not, that the juices don't flow, and you look and check it out.
Remember that when I watched that live.
And maybe it's still on YouTube, but you got to get up close and personal. And
this is Hurricane Ike, I think.
That was recent. That was, wasn't this Rita?
You would know.
You know what? I think it was Rita. Rita in Galveston, Texas. Yeah. Galveston. And obviously Katrina. Before that changed so many of our histories. It was so traumatic. And it's one funny thing I think of if only a hurricane had come on 9/11. Remember, they didn't know how to use instruments, the terrorists. They took off in Boston, and they literally, after they took over the aircraft, they steered by line of sight. And it was that crystal clear September day. It was. And if it were only one of these weather days, history would have been rewritten. And I think about that a lot now, and especially this time of year. So, we're the peak of hurricanes. Yeah, you're celebrating 40 years? 40 years, imagine that. 40 years. 40 years. And, longevity has its own revenge. I've outlived like 15 generations of TV critics. Yeah. They all predicted I'd be done in a couple of weeks. You still get...
Everyone has those stories, right?
Oh, yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good example of what was people who like to come up with conspiracy theories could say, oh, he's covering it up. Even if he's covering it up, it still is evidence. Whichever way you look at it, either he knew about it or he didn't know about it. Either way, the fact that that is going out on air just 2 years ago is evidence that it was underreported on 9/11. A Category 3 hurricane barreling down in New York City for 4 days, and people weren't aware of it. There's more evidence of underreported. There it is. Meet Hurricane Aaron. This is the morning of 9/11. There's end of Long Island. There it is.
Well, I don't know about that. Here again, you're asking us to deal with the fact that I'm not aware of. I never heard about flames or fumes. Fumes coming out of a building. I'll tell you what, first of all, let me go to Steve in Florida. Steve in Florida, you're on the air. Go ahead, please, with Dr. Judy Wood.
Hi, Joy. Thank you for taking my call. Am I loud and clear?
Yeah, you are. Go ahead.
Judy, you have misrepresented the facts concerning Hurricane Aaron. I live here in hurricane country, Florida. I track all the hurricanes. Aaron hit Corpus Christi, Texas, 15 August 2007. Your opinion concerning 911 are not consistent with the facts provided on 911 ripple effect, last man out, Richard Gage's blueprint for truth, loose change final cut, Zero, an investigation into 911, and many other video documentaries. I don't know what planet you come from.
Okay. I guess he's gone. I don't know what happened to Steve.
As for Hurricane Aaron, they did not retire that name. It has been used several times. It was the first hurricane, I believe, of the 2001 hurricane season.
All right, let me go back to George. George, ask her one question that you would like to get answered.
Well, I don't think MIT does much in conspiracy theory, especially at those levels.
Is that a question?
We do talk about...
I'll answer that one question. I'll answer one question.
I may ask my question. I remember 9/11 very clearly, and you talk about Hurricane Aaron coming and having some effects. And I do recall almost every picture, in fact, every picture I've seen of New York on that day, the sky was blue. Clear blue, not a cloud in the sky. If you go and follow the track...
do you have a question, or
no, wait a second. Okay, he's asking the question about obviously about the hurricane. I never heard about the hurricane. This is hurting, I think, the situation because we can't verify some of your so-called evidence here. I'm trying to. I'm wanting to. Well, it's also that we're saying hurricanes are things that are documented.
Yes.
And if you have it documented and nobody else does, then
the National Hurricane Center has it documented. This is another issue. Why is it not been publicized?
This is, I think, spring of 2010. 2010. That host is pretty confident there wasn't a hurricane that day to be saying what she said. But there it was. This is the morning of 9/11, this photograph. Isn't that amazing?
Completely amazing. I haven't heard anything about that either until now.
That's right. So are you shocked? Like, okay, is this a joke? Is this really true? The first radio show I was on where I brought it up, the guy was, are you sure? Did you have a meteorologist look and make sure that and you hear clack, 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 clack on the keyboard as he's doing a web search. At least he, checked it out and saw that it was there and like, oh my gosh. There's New York City. For 4 days in a row, it was going towards New York, and then it got larger. It stopped and got larger, and then that afternoon it headed out of town and went on about its business. The longest-lived hurricane of the season, and that storm system had more cyclonic energy in it than Katrina. It was predicted to be stronger than Katrina. Sure, it was going to turn on sometime, but gee, I thought it was going to turn on day one. It didn't. These weather service text messages, and then they thought it was going to turn on day 2. It didn't. Then they thought it was going to turn around day 3. It didn't. Then they thought it was going to turn on day 4. Well, good thing it did. They were kind of out of time, and it was the closest to New York. The yellow is Category 2. It was Category 3. There, it's like a runaway train. Coming down coming down a hill, and then it screeches around the turn. It's kind of stalled out in here. At 8 o'clock on the morning of 9/11, like reporting for duty, sir. And then it went on about its way. It didn't get busted out by the high pressure system. Let's look at the evidence.
If only a hurricane had come on 9/11.
And looking at the perimeter, I drew those red arrows in there. All the rest is as it showed up on TV. 10 minutes to 15 minutes before the North Tower got its hole that day. Now, on the right, I've superimposed where the hurricane was at that time. I matched the shoreline, and you can see that the shoreline goes over the guy's hands. He's pointing out. A weather man I talked to said, well, gee, how much effort would it take just to click the icon to stick a hurricane on there? And I'm not saying it went unreported, it went underreported. Especially, it's going to be as nice as can be here in Manhattan. It's as nice as can be right there. And you got a hurricane right there. Actually, there's a flight attendant who flew out of Boston that morning about 45 minutes before that fateful flight that ended up supposedly in one of the towers. And he actually saw that crew in there. They weren't seen again after that. But when their plane took off and it went to San Francisco, it went north. Well, it was heading to San Francisco, took off to the north and banked over to the west and went on about its business. They ended up getting grounded in Des Moines. But, before a flight, the crew's all together and they have kind of a powwow about what the flight's going to be like and things to watch out for and what problems they can foresee and whatnot. Never once was a hurricane mentioned. He was not aware of that hurricane until he saw it on my website years later. Isn't that amazing? It was raining on Cape Cod, and they took off out of Boston. Yeah, we're going to look also at the magnetic field of the Earth. Let's look some more at the weather. So here we have this high-pressure system is moving in. This is the data at JFK Airport. So you can see this high pressure is moving in, and then when the hurricane arrives, it's a low-pressure system, the pressure starts dropping. So guess where the two met, the two weather systems, and at what time? 10 a.m. on 9/11. The high-pressure system and low-pressure system met over Manhattan. This coincidence. And the hurricane goes counterclockwise, and high-pressure system goes clockwise in the northern hemisphere. So they're two counter-rotating systems. And interesting humidity drop, just a linear drop. It's kind of strange. But there's where all the various events of the day, and here's Building 7 went over here. And the chart at the bottom is the Earth's magnetic field. I just had to look into that. And so for several days leading up to the events of 9/11, it's fairly uneventful. It wanders around. And you can have space weather, the sun's, they call it burping up, spitting up, you have a coronal mass ejection. You have this kind of magnetic electrical energy that hits the poles. There's something that did happen, but it didn't hit the Earth until a day later. It was uneventful, but there's something down on the magnetometers in the satellites didn't sense anything, but down on the ground level is where these measurements were taken. So we're going to look at this region and blow it up. So here we have, these are 6 different magnetometer stations in Alaska. I just happened to find a whole lot of data from those. You can see how the data coming up to this, they drop and do some other things. And when the WTC-1 goes away, it's all haywire all afternoon until Building 7 goes away. And it's almost back to normal after that. This is a close-up of leading right up to the first hole. All the values trend down, and as soon as the North Tower gets a hole, it trends up. And as soon as the South Tower gets a hole, it goes horizontally. Just coincidence. That's data. Whatever you think of it is whatever you think of it. It ends up being data, but it's mighty strange that something happened precisely at each of the events. Especially let's see. Well, especially here, it starts going down with the demise of Tower 2, then it really drops off with the demise of 1. And remember how Building 7 was dustifying all afternoon. It's food for thought. Okay, now we're going to look at something different. Some of John Hutchison's samples and other evidence. We've seen this guy. You probably know him well. Well, of him. There are stories about him. I don't know how to go back in time, so I've never met him, but I know there's a lot of stories about him. He's the fellow who's responsible for bringing us alternating current, so I understand. He discovered that, or maybe it's somebody else discovered, but he brought it to fruition, the idea of hydroelectric power plants. When you move a conductor in a magnetic field, voila, like magic, you get electricity. And we also know from Cub Scouts or elementary school that when you get a wire and wrap it around a nail and plug it into a 9-volt battery, that nail acts like a magnet. So we know these two different kinds of energy fields are related. Turns out there's another energy field that's related as well, as gravity. But here's some of the... John Hutchison was trying to reproduce a lot of the work of Nikola Tesla. And turns out he had reproduced all of the same things that we saw at the site on 9/11 and the days following. In particular, metal luminance without heat. Things glow without being hot. And another one that I kind of like is this lift or disruption. You get flip cars or toasted cars. They tend not to be both. Fuming, crumbling, transmutation, the changing of one element to another. Well, let's start with a little over 100 years ago. George Pigott. He has a static field here and interferes with there's something else, and he has the metal balls that are levitating. He got a patent on it. He applied for it in 1903, but in 1911 he was awarded a patent for it for radiant electrical energy. As it turns out, how John Hutchison creates the weird effects that he's created is through creating a static field, and within the static field interferes various radio frequency signals. He initially used a Tesla coil, then later began using a Van de Graaff generator, and often uses microwave frequencies. And he gets old surplus Navy ship equipment and vacuum tubes. He likes analog, and I suspect you could use other things too. I was like, oh, this is fun. Let's see what this does. And then we have Thomas Townsend Brown, who worked a lot with charging up airplane wings so they can fly faster, altering what we consider normal physics, but it's really just a different kind of physics than what we learn in school. And Ed Leedskounen, a fellow from Latvia who came to the U.S. and ended up in Florida, excavated brain coral from the ground and built a castle, made 15-ton stones. And he lifted them. He's like 120 pounds. He lifted them with these little chains up here. Those chains can't lift 15-ton stones. Must have a different way of lifting them. He also had his own power plant. He has magnets on this flywheel, and he's showing how it works there. Then we have John Hutchison. He's got, it's like 2.5, 3-inch diameter solid copper. That's not a tubing, it's solid copper. How does it get this nice smooth bend in it without cracking? And he plugs it into a 120 socket in the wall. You can lift a 70-pound cannonball. Very little power put in. Oops. And Ed Leedskousen's castle is on the left that he built out of brain coral. Actually, I don't know if you're familiar with that Billy Idol song, Sweet 16.
No, I don't.
He wrote it about Ed Leedskousen and actually filmed his video there. He has some other words like build a candy castle, but coral castle. Anyway, here's John Hutchison in front of the Great Pyramid. If we look down here at this person at the bottom, and we could see that they're about 2 stones tall, and I've got a blow up at the top there. And if you look, they're a little less than 2 stones tall, and that's about the size of that doorway. So, and not just take my word for it, you can see that it's about the same size stones as the Great Pyramid, and they're both said to be about 15 tons. Kind of gives you some ideas of maybe how that was put together there.
Right.
And here's an experiment by John Hutchison, where he's on a, this is plywood platform, his target area, and he's got this solid piece of iron that's, about 2 inches by 2 inches by 7 inches tall, solid iron, and it kind of looks like it gets sick and doubles over, crumples up. And you get fumes coming off it, which is interesting. And the video clip I'm going to show will also show cars on West Broadway, the swamp, show the door handles fuming. There's an open window. If you had smoke inside that wanted to come out, it's not coming out the window. Why would it choose the door handle to come out through? And so there is where you'll see the fumes coming off of it. You see the door handle fuming away there. We'll get a close-up on this. There's the... And when he was finished, it was colder to the touch than ambient temperature. And many of the people who were there when the buildings dustified said the dust cloud initially felt cooler than ambient temperature. Later it was, itchy and felt like it was burning because it was chewing on their skin. And we have weird fires. There's the igloo cooler and the plastic trash can that didn't seem to be melting or wilting, and the aluminum cladding that's not wilting. Paper not burning. And we're going to see some weird fires here. And what you'll notice is when the gizmo's turned on, the water is jumping up and down. And when it turns off, it's right after it turns off is when this plastic boat ignites. Does it several times. So it lights up just after he turns off the gizmo. And then we have these curled up beams, or columns, from the WTC, and below we have the curled up bars from John Hutchison's work. And here's one. Watch in this video, you'll watch this piece of steel bar kind of wiggling around the table. There's also a video where the same bar is doing sit-ups. It's this, solid steel bar. Oh, and here, watch around the midsection. Watch it come apart. That flat piece of steel. And at the WTC, we have these, here it's rounded holes in just the outer pane, not the inner pane. And, places where the outer pane's gone and the inner pane's still intact. Glass is a brittle material, and it's weak in tension. If you hit it with a baseball, it bends, and the outer surface is in tension, and it breaks, and the crack travels. How do you get a round hole in the window? I'd love to see a high school student in high school physics raise his hand and say, teacher, when I throw my baseball through the window, it leaves a spider web pattern. How do you do that? Can you show us? And here's in somebody's lab. Longitudinal waves apparently do this. Now, on the right is an analogy I have. If you rotate your head or the image in your mind, think of a rock dropping into a lake, and the waves ripple outward because of the displacement. Perhaps there's an energy field that's perpendicular to the glass that causes a rippling outward within the glass, and that like the ripples might interfere with each other and catch up with each other and cause a circular hole. I was trying to figure out what you get this almost perfect circle, very rounded. Now we look at hurricanes some more, and tornadoes. Hurricane Andrew in '92, we had this 2x4 through a tree. And then we have plywood through a palm tree here. Now imagine the trajectory of a piece of plywood to do that. Now, of course, we've all heard about straw in trees. And we're told, we just repeat it and don't think about it and just told over and over again, it's because the straw is flying so fast it sticks in the tree. And then someone came up with the story about the tree bending over and the straw sticking in it and the tree going upright and the straw, right at the right time.
Oops. I don't hear Dr. Judy. Okay. Well, might be a good time to take a break. And so I think what we'll do is we'll see if we can find Dr. Judy again, and we're going to line up some things for folks to watch. So let me just do that. How's it going, Julia?
Good, thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah. So how are you finding this part?
Fascinating. Trying to figure out what in the world it could be that caused these things. It's completely fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oops. You're back. Okay.
Yep. And let me add the.
Just that I just went to. I just gave us a little break there for a second. It's gone back to. I just have something playing because I lost you for a second there. So if you want to just have a little break. Julia, if you put your microphone just up a little bit away from your mouth when you're not speaking, and then just put it back down. What I do is I just turn off, just mute my microphone when I'm not speaking usually.
Yeah, I have been muting it too.
Have you? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so do you want to just go right back into it?
We'll just talk for a second here. Julia, how do you like where it's headed now?
It's very interesting. Can't wait to see where we land.
Yeah.
We've got people asking about that too in the room.
Asking about it.
Sorry.
They're playing at the dirt.
We're playing at the dirt. Yeah, whoops. Okay. Helps if I take my headphone off when I'm walking away. Anyway, yeah, there's quite a few people listening, and I'm just going to see if there's any specific questions. One of the guys says, Kitty needs more treats. Because I said, they asked if that was your kitty, and if it was just shocking because this is the first time your kitty's heard this information.
That's what I thought too. I thought the kitty was saying, "Wow."
Yeah, what are these humans doing? Okay, I'm going to be right back. Just take a sec.
You got sent out of the room. He's wanting to participate too much.
Yeah, Kitty got banished for talking too much. we all know how that happens.
Yeah, talk in the classroom. the other one was off sleeping, so you need to be with that one. I was worried that he had tripped over the internet cable, and that's why I got disconnected. I didn't know, because it was right when he was walking, climbing up.
So do you want to just go right back then?
Yeah. So we're going from this one to the next slide.
Okay.
I think you'd cover this one, right? So here we are.
Just hang on for 1 sec. We're going to go live in just a sec. Okay. And it's got 18 seconds until we over. I just try not to, go flipping back and forth.
Yeah, I wanted to go on to the next one right when it starts.
Okay. Yeah. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second.
Okay, so here we go.
Yeah, we're live.
We're going to talk about how dissimilar materials merge together. And, of course, we've heard about hurricanes, except here's from Hurricane Andrew. We got a 2x4 stuck through a tree. And here's a piece of plywood stuck through the tree. Imagine how that plywood's flying through the air to do that. It's pretty strange. And a tornado, we can see straw through trees. Of course, we're all told, oh yeah, and people just repeat it without thinking, that it's flying so fast it stabs into a tree. But think, that doesn't make sense. You know how Newton's laws are, equal and opposite forces. So how can the force a straw exerts on a tree, the straw would fail. This guy in Russia has a really nice collection of them down here. And then we have John Hutchison's knife in a slab of aluminum. There's another one he has where he has wood in the aluminum. And it's wood from his platform, his target area. He had a piece of aluminum on it, and didn't realize that after he's done that the aluminum had fused to the wood. So somebody ground it down so you could see an edge view. But people assume that it's because it's flying fast because that's what we're told. Now, think about this other way of imagining that I think we've all played the game of musical chairs as a kid, where the music's playing and you're up walking around and one of the chairs disappears, and then the music stops and you have to sit down and there's somebody who doesn't get a seat. And then you keep repeating it. Let's say while the music is playing, the field effects are in effect, that all the molecules are up kind of like loosely dancing around. And the music stops and they have to grab back on to where they had been. And sometimes they don't quite grab back on well enough and they leave out steel has carbon and other doodads in it that make it steel. In addition to the majority of it, like 97% of it's iron, with these other small ingredients. And let's say those other ingredients don't get grabbed right back on, so you have more on the surface of pure iron. But using that analogy, let's say the molecules in this tree were just kind of loosely connected as that piece of straw was flying along. And it stuck in the tree right when the music stopped playing. Now, just a thought. This peeling effect, I discovered that about a year before I went looking into the Hutchison material. I didn't know what this was, but I didn't feel compelled to plug it into anything. I just kind of left it on the shelf. It was definitely a trend. This is weird. It looks like a cheese slicer peeled the split thickness of that door down, and same with this one. That's not what fire does. Something going on there. And then when I saw a Hutchison sample, this is aluminum, extruded aluminum. Why is it delaminating and peeling? Heat doesn't do that. It's very sharp edges. And actually, someone sent one of Hutchison's samples to, I think it was University of Texas Metallurgy Department, and asked them about it, and they didn't know how on earth someone could do that. They couldn't reproduce it. They were just in awe of it. And up above we have, the WTC pieces. This upper left corner is the only file cabinet found. Take my word for it, that's a file cabinet. The only surviving file cabinet from the WTC. It was actually underground in Ben & Jerry's ice cream store. And they apparently stored money in that file cabinet. And the money was still there. They had color dividers, the red one and a blue divider in there. And the rescue guys who found it turned it back over to Ben & Jerry's. And the guy at a museum learned about it, and he wanted to have a file cabinet from the WTC. He talked about how much oil he had to put on it to keep from rusting. So it looks kind of rusty there. Then there's these coins from the WTC. And this is really peculiar. You think of, it looks like a stack of pennies there, and it looks like quarters there. You get maybe a dime over there. You get different coins in there. And pennies, you have zinc inside with the copper on the outside. And zinc not only melts before copper melts, it boils before copper melts. So why do these pennies look intact? And zinc melts at a pretty low temperature. And folks say this is from heat. Well, how do you get something melting together? Zinc is one of the lowest melting, materials of the metals that we're familiar with. And here's the piece of aluminum with the wood stuck in it, and this is a large view of it, of Hutchison's. You look at how crisp that fusing is right next to the material. If that aluminum is hot enough to melt, it would have burned up the wood. The wood is sort of uniform. It doesn't look, kind of decrepit right next to the bonding line either. Somebody just ground it down, from a solid piece. This is the aluminum that was sitting on his wooden platform. So we got something going on here. Looks like it's at low temperature. And here we have these vertical holes that look like cylindrical cutouts in WTC-6. Almost like somebody got a post hole digger and just cored out that building. And here's Hutchison's sample. He's got cylindrical cutouts where you wouldn't be sticking a drill in there. This is a solid bar of aluminum. It doesn't have a hole in the end. I had a hard time trying to figure out how to take a picture of it. But this tunnel looks like it's parallel to the surface. So imagine if you have 2 points in space with a line between them, like you got some ray of something happening through space, or, in material, and then at a radial distance out from that line, it dustifies all the material. That's what that looks like. Now, why that line is there, we don't know. And this sort of looks like the same kind of thing. Initially, you look at this and you think it came from above because it's vertical holes, but maybe there's some kind of potential that's going along some vertical line that just dustifies stuff out at a radial distance from those cylindrical cutouts. Now here's something kind of interesting. We have a Tesla coil here. It's wrapped around the stem, and then it's this toroid wrapped around the top. Well, here's a model of one. If you look at the anatomy of a hurricane, it kind of is made the same way. And the same with tornadoes. And you have a potential between the roof here and the ground. And you get an arcing across there. My uncle was out hiking on the top of a mountain with a buddy, and he felt the hairs in the back of his neck standing up. He's dove over the cliff. He felt like he had a better chance there than where he was. And it turned out he landed on a little ledge down below. It was caught in a tree. His buddy was toasted on the spot. Lightning had hit. They're in this thunderstorm on top of a mountain. He just, he felt the hair go up the back of his neck and dove. Because he was like acting like an antenna. And here we got this, how you get thunderstorms going and tornadoes and whatnot. They're all somewhat similar. It seems like a lightning thing between the cloud and the ground is sort of a one-dimensional, and then you have a faster moving thing of tornadoes, which is sort of like a two-dimensional, and you have a big hurricane, which is sort of like a three-dimensional thing because it's got the top thing. The tornadoes are sort of like a mini version. But there's something interesting about them. And let's consider something else. We have, trailer parks. Tornadoes really like trailer parks. They're attracted to them. Kind of interesting. Could it be that trailers aren't very, very well grounded, and if there's some sort of charge in the atmosphere, they can't discharge fast enough because they're up on kind of rubber tires with just wires connecting them? They're not potted in the ground, so to speak. The sewage and stuff isn't right down into the ground. It's all like tanks and so forth. It's self-contained, and it makes you kind of wonder. And also think about how much damage can get caused by a tornado. Where does that energy come from? That's a lot of energy to tear up something. It almost justifies it. And actually, when I saw WTC-4, that slice, it reminded me of what I saw as a child when we drove through Topeka, Kansas, the morning right after this horrendous tornado had torn up the town. And I thought at the time it was an apartment building, but I've come to realize it was probably a dorm. It was like 4 stories or so tall. As this bedroom, it looked like it was just sliced in two. Half the building was gone, half was still there, untouched. And the bed was made, it was a white bedspread, and it reminded me of my sister's bed. It looked just like it, and it had magazines on the bedspread, and books on the dresser, and clothes hanging in the closet. There's no support under that floor, so if somebody didn't go in there and make the bed afterwards, it was just bizarre, like somebody just took an X-Acto knife, sliced the building in two, and removed half the building. And it reminded me just of what I saw at Building 4. And it's kind of like of the Pentagon, too, the slice. But why do tornadoes slice things? It's like it's a plane along which they act. Kind of like, the cylindrical cutouts. This is from the Twin Cities, Dallas-Fort Worth last spring.
Thank goodness, but the pictures are mind-boggling. Look at these right now. These tractor trailers we're going to show you. They look like Tonka trucks being thrown through the air right there, and then they piled up. There it is, right there, right after the massive twisters. They were just flying through the air and twirling.
And entire neighborhoods were torn up. We have the roof ripped off from a home. The entire bedroom looks intact with a flat screen TV still there. Another home there. 2x4s shooting through the walls like missiles. So much of the destruction caught on tape as it happened around 1 p.m. Dallas time.
Those were deadly weapons, but no one was killed.
We've got complete coverage of the storm.
Good morning, Katie. Amazing pictures here at the ground, too. Let me take you inside one of the more eerie post-tornado scenes I have ever been witness to. See the party streamers still hanging from the banisters? Yet the kitchen and most of the home vacuumed away, as several tornadoes did this to so many hundreds of homes in hailing parts of northeast Texas.
So right now,
it's a series of images that make you say, oh my, all caught on camera. News choppers capturing the moment this tornado starts raging with full force.
Look, these huge trailers, these huge rigs, the back ends of tractor trailers that are literally being picked up and thrown hundreds of yards.
Take a closer look. Keep in mind, these trucks weigh at least 12,000 pounds empty, here being tossed hundreds of feet into the air.
What was interesting is that when they showed those pieces of wood that had stabbed through the building, through the house, I didn't see any torn up ends on it. It didn't look like a spear in there, it was just like a flat, undamaged piece of wood. And there's one more.
As we went across a transport company, trees flying through the air, the trailers, there you go, a couple of semis, look at that, the beds of the trailers twirling around in the sky and then dropping down from at least 50 feet high down into the ground. We see trees, there goes another semi, it's spinning. Down it comes, bang, lands on its nose right down at the ground. Big piece of the tree there that just got hurled up, I believe it was. So certainly we have seen a destructive tornado on the south side of Dallas, still within parts of the area near south of Grapevine, north of Arlington, a possible tornado in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area, as well as over on the east side of Dallas, in toward the area around the Mesquite area, just to the west of Mesquite and east of...
It's interesting how it's tumbling on the way up, and then it's just like it falls out of the field and just relaxes and drifts down. And it drifts down because you saw them on the ground; they didn't look like they're that damaged. And it's like a tin box. It's pretty, a cardboard box. It's pretty easy to damage those. It looks like it was set down gently. And I do remember a story of about. Let's see. You got a message on the screen there. I'll get rid of that. Yeah. But that, let's see, where was I?
Whoopsie.
That's right, I distract myself here. The story about the children. There was a house that was totally destroyed. It was full of people. And all the members of the family survived, at least for some time. There was a baby that was damaged. I think that it ended up being okay. It was in ICU for a while. There was a little boy who ended up on the highway, or next to the highway, just was set down there. You know, people flew out of the houses and ended up being set down. They didn't get busted up too badly. Where the house was completely destroyed, which is pretty amazing. There's a different type of energy field attracted to people versus the house, it seemed. But with Hutchison, one thing that really stuck is he would get lift or disruption, not both, or rarely both. It would tend to be one or the other. So it's people flew out of the house while their house was destroyed. But you think of the kind of damage that goes through, with a tornado, and it's not necessarily, as we just saw there, it's not necessarily the funnel cloud. It's not like the toilet bowl effect, but it's the environment, the field effects around it that those trucks were pulled up into. And after my book came out, somebody in Florida wrote to me and talked about how they're out, I think it's after a football practice, and before the coach had called him in time, he was with a few other people and got lifted up. And he said it was very interesting. He had no problem breathing, so it isn't like a vacuum. And he said proprioception and movement were exact and easy. You know, where you're, like, you know how you can close your eyes and touch your nose with your finger because you have a sense of where your nose is. So he knew he could have really good perception of where his body parts were, and it was so easy to move. It's like weightlessness, I guess. Pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. We have seen a...
Oops. Okay. Now let's look at the Bankers Trust across the way. It was up in here where we saw, I got the wrong color, I've shown arrow, where we saw the crinkled beam that looked like ribbon candy. This wheat checks here did not carve out that hole in the building. This was right across the street from Building 2. So what's the deal? Well, it turns out they repaired it. It is being repaired. And then after they finish repairing it, deconstruction begins. What? Why do they repair a building to destroy it? It turns out because they did some studies on the dust. And it was an ongoing reaction. It was infected with something that eats. They tried to say it was infected with mold, but a steel frame building infected with mold, so you have to take it down. Well, they got it down to where it had been damaged, and check out this rustified beam here. It looks like it's been at the bottom of the ocean for 100 years. This is the hole is right around in there. And that's looking north across the street. What's the deal with that steel? And it's consistent with that mental image I have of like musical chairs, where while the music's playing, the molecules and so forth kind of let go of each other, and then when the music stops, they grab back hold. And sometimes, the carbon and whatnot don't get back to where they need to be on the surface. And maybe that's what that looks like. It's rusted like pure iron would rust. Rustification. Look at transmutation, the changing of elements. Well, looking at the Bankers Trust dust, there's something in there that made them want to take the building down. This is what normal dust from that area that was unaffected looks like. And here's the affected dust. It's kind of eaten out like Swiss cheese. Plenty of holes in it. And it's got some other elements in it, as you can see down in that line below. Let's see. Now on the left we have, the before and after, or the unaffected is the blue data, and the affected is the red data. And there's one particular element you see a whole lot more of is zinc. And this is the ratio of the two, of the unaffected, of the affected to the unaffected. And it's like 3,500 times almost more zinc. So what's causing more zinc to appear? Here's one of John Hutchison's samples. He's got, for brass, a lot of copper and zinc in it. The unaffected here, and then the affected over here, where you have almost the same. You don't care about the magnitude, just the relative amounts. So you have just about the same copper and zinc. So if it's affected by heat, something is vaporizing, what are you going to lose first? Well, let's look down here at the chart. We have zinc melts at 420 centigrade, where copper melts at 1085. Zinc boils at 907, which is before copper even melts. So if this is due to heat, the zinc's going to go away first, not the copper. But the copper decreased, or the copper decreased and the zinc increased, or the copper just increased. But relative to each other, there's an increase in zinc compared to copper. And one thing I'd like to point out here, which I find interesting, is copper in periodic tables number 29, and zinc is 30. Wonder if one becomes the other? In John Hutchison's samples, it seems to be like the materials really change. They change to a different material. We're going to look at another sampling of the dust and air coming off of the quote pile, the debris field, and looking at the relative boiling temperatures. The blue is below 900 centigrade for boiling temperature. Purple is in the middle, and red is high boiling temperature. So you'd expect to have the least amount of red and the most amount of blue if it's heat related. There's no rhyme or reason to this. You get stuff all over the place. Also, they had in here organic material, which wouldn't be there if it was high heat. Something kind of weird was going on. We're going to look at tritium. It's a product of like nuclear leaky nuke plants, also nuke bombs. But with nuke bombs, you get a whole bunch of other ionizing radiation. We didn't have that at WTC. But let's just look at relative amounts. The actual values, this compared to the Great Lakes, like Lake Superior, 2.5. These are all the same units. 120 for what it was found at WTC, and a little beaker of what they use for what was referred to as cold fusion, which is really just low energy nuclear reactions, is 6,000. And then leaky nuke plants, a whole lot, many times more orders of magnitude. Let's see. Now what this is some excerpts from a video about the cold fusion debacle, where it really, what a lot of people are left to think it was bogus science. They were somehow conditioned to believe that, where it was really something that had been observed. And in 2009, Pons and Fleischmann, the ones who had brought this to be in 1989, were pretty much vindicated, but their careers had already been destroyed. But there's other people have been able to replicate it, and here's one of them here. And they talk about the tritium that was measured. That became the very weird aspect of it all, that with this so-called cold fusion, there's tritium. And then they went to this phase where they thought that these guys were spiking their samples with tritium because they didn't have the other ionizing radiation. Because the guys weren't dead from the ionizing radiation, so therefore they're bogus, right? That's what they're written off as, because this effect does not produce ionizing radiation. You'll see is that the pattern of this is very similar to what was found from the WTC.
At Texas A&M, a group led by Professor John Bockwitz, who is widely regarded as one of the world's greatest electrical chemists, reported finding the hydrogen isotope tritium, a key signature that some unusual nuclear reaction was going on.
Jan.
The first thing was this thing called tritium, which was a sub-form of hydrogen which should not exist, except in extremely tiny quantities. We found that by working these cells of Fleischmann ponds that contain lithium hydroxide and deuterium oxide, that we could produce this tritium in great abundance. Let's say at 10,000 times more than it ought to be there, as it were. And let me stress that we couldn't do it every time, but about one result in 5, one result in 4, and eventually we worked up to 2 results out of 3. We could produce tritium. That was the first thing, and in a way it was the first clear proof of the phenomenon.
But the most important and unbelievable phenomenon at that time was the observation of tritium.
Back at Texas A&M, Bockritz's group found themselves under attack. Science magazine writer Gary Tobbs wrote a stinging article that insinuated that someone in the group had spiked the samples with tritium. Although unfounded and eventually proved untrue, the allegation effectively dampened Bockritz's remarkable claims.
But I think the main part was that I had done the work which was against the paradigm. That was the big brilliance. People laughed at it. What the heck are you doing, trying to disprove the laws of nuclear physics? That's exactly what we were doing, and succeeding, you see.
The tritium work was the first indication to me that there was reality, and then later at Los Alamos also got positive results, so did Howard Menlo. And there were people that I respect and could talk to personally. It became fairly clear that there was a very strange phenomenon occurring here.
There are also similar experiments sometimes, and rather dissimilar experiments sometimes, evidence of an anomalous nuclear process. However, it is conceivable that there may be a process even more powerful than nuclear reaction that physics does not yet understand. That is the mystery of cold fusion. Yet as early as 1992, cold fusion experimenters began reporting unusual appearances of trace amounts of different metals such as copper, silver, chromium, and zinc when examining their spent cells. Rechecking for possible contamination, scientists like Bondy confirmed that indeed new metals and isotopes were being formed, transmuted, during the process which produces excess heat.
Kevin Wolf made many measurements of tritium. Then he got some even more astonishing results, as early as 92, which were these transmutation results. The metal forming another metal inside. The electrode, you see, which was super anti-paradigm. That's that dreadful word alchemy, which you must have used. It was a form of that in a way. It was creating new metals.
We see transmutation phenomena. We see helium-4 production. We see a range of methods of getting the excess heat. The writing is on the wall. Fossil fuel aging is about to end.
The sword of this panel's condemnation struck with speed and brutality, ignoring the facts in a blind rush to judgment.
And fusion physics people have been very vigorous in their denunciation of this being called fusion.
Right away, reports came in of excess heat, once large potential reaction. The laboratory also tests confirmed the presence of tritium, a vital determining feature of a nuclear reaction.
It took 3 weeks. They got the first results. And several groups started saying, yes, the most important and unbelievable phenomenon at that time was the observation of tritium.
This was a discovery perhaps as significant as the Wright brothers' first flight of Kitty Hawk.
There are also, in similar experiments, evidence of an anomalous nuclear process.
In the free-for-all that followed the cold fusion announcement, hot fusion proponents drew the specious conclusion that cold fusion must work like hot fusion. If Pons and Fleischmann are alive, they contended, their results must be faulty, since the neutron radiation, the fusion reaction, would surely have killed them. They refused to consider that another form of the same process might be at work. In the years that have followed, the cold fusion process has repeatedly produced not only heat energy, but also nuclear byproducts such as tritium and the ash from the nuclear reaction, that all-important indicator of nuclear fusion, helium.
It's clearly not possible to produce helium from a chemical process. The only possibility that remains is that the helium is produced by a nuclear process. If the helium is produced by a nuclear process, then necessarily there will be an associated release of heat. Having seen the effect with my own eyes, the claims from a few that this is impossible, inconsistent with all known laws of nuclear physics, these suggestions are in fact irrelevant.
I like that last phrase.
Dr. Judy, we didn't hear that at all because there was a fan going. So what I'm going to suggest we do is let the audience see that or hear it again. It was quite loud, so I've just mentioned when there were technical difficulties. So what I'm going to suggest is that we play it again.
It's different than the other ones? Huh.
Yeah, your fan, I think, or something.
Yeah, there is a fan down there for the computer. Yeah, okay.
So what
I know. I had it sitting, the microphone sitting differently.
Okay, well, that's okay.
I just turned it off. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Why don't you play it again then? Play it again, Sam.
Okay.
Okay, so are you okay with that, Julia?
Yeah.
And a group led by Professor John.
Can you hear it?
Just hang on for a sec. Julia, are you there?
Yes, I just had it muted and make sure that there's no interference. Yes, absolutely. Replay it. That's fine.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay. So just to anybody who is listening out there, I hope you come back and watch. It was a little bit loud for some people, but we're going to play it again. Okay.
Okay. I turned down the loudness and okay. Let's do a test drive just to see if how it is.
Texas A&M, a group led by
Is that good?
Professor
Okay.
John
Yeah, that's great.
is widely regarded as one of the world's greatest electrochemists, reported finding the hydrogen isotope tritium, a key signature that some unusual nuclear reaction was going on.
The first thing was this thing called tritium, which was a sub-form of hydrogen which should not exist, except in extremely tiny quantities. We found that by working these cells of Fleischmann Pons that contain lithium hydroxide and deuterium oxide, that we could produce this tritium in great abundance. Let's say at 10,000 times more than it ought to be there, as it were. And let me stress that we couldn't do it every time. About one result in 5, or one result in 4, and eventually we worked up to 2 results out of 3. We could produce tritium. That was the first thing, and in a way it was the first clear proof of the phenomenon.
And but the most important and unbelievable phenomenon at that time was the observation of tritium.
Back at Texas A&M, Blockler's group found themselves under attack. Science magazine writer Gary Tobbs wrote a stinging article that insinuated that someone in the group had spiked the samples with tritium. Although unfounded and eventually proved untrue, the allegation effectively dampens Blockler's remarkable claims.
But I think the main part was that I had done work which was against the paradigm. That was what we were really upset about. People had laughed at it. What the heck are you doing, trying to disprove the laws of nuclear physics? Of course, that's exactly what we were doing. And succeeding, you see.
The tritium work was the first indication to me that there was a reality. And then Clater at Los Alamos also got positive results, and so did Howard Menlo. And they're people that I respect and could talk to personally. it became fairly clear that there was a very strange phenomenon occurring here.
There are also similar experiments sometimes, rather dissimilar nuclear.
However, it is conceivable that there may be a process even more powerful than nuclear reaction that physics does not yet understand. That is the mystery of cold fusion. Yet as early as 1992, cold fusion experimenters began recording unusual appearances of trace amounts of different metals such as copper, silver, chromium, and zinc when examining their spent cells. Rechecking for possible contamination, scientists like Bacchus and Mali confirmed that indeed new metals and isotopes were being formed, transmuted, during the process which produced excess heat.
Kevin made many measurements of tritium. Then he got some even more astonishing results, as early as 92, which were these transmutational results, the metal forming another metal inside the electrode, you see, which was super anti-paradigm. There's that dreadful word alchemy, which we mustn't use, but it was a form of that in a way. It was creating new metals, you see.
We see transmutation phenomena. We see helium-4 production. We see a range of methods of getting the excess heat. The writing is on the wall. The fossil fuel age is about to end.
The sword of this panel's condemnation struck with speed and brutality, ignoring the facts in a blind rush to judgment.
Hot fusion physics people have been very vigorous in their denunciation of this being called fusion.
Right away, reports came in of excess heat, much too large to be from any chemical reaction. Laboratories from Texas to India confirmed the presence of tritium, a vital determining feature of a nuclear reaction.
In 2 or 3 weeks, we got the first results, and several groups started saying, yes, we are seeing excess heat, and but the most important and unbelievable phenomenon at the time was the observation of tritium.
This was a discovery perhaps as significant as the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk.
There are also, in similar experiments, evidence of an anomalous nuclear process.
In the free-for-all that followed the cold fusion announcement, hot fusion proponents drew the specious conclusion that cold fusion must work like hot fusion. If Pons and Fleischmann are alive, they contended, then their results must be faulty, since the neutron radiation from the fusion reaction would surely have killed them. They refused to consider that another form of the same process might be at work. In the years that have followed, the cold fusion process has repeatedly produced not only heat energy, but also nuclear byproducts such as tritium and the ash from a nuclear reaction, that all-important indicator of nuclear fusion, helium.
It's clearly not possible to produce helium from a chemical process. The only possibility that remains is that the helium is produced by a nuclear process. If the helium is produced by a nuclear process, then necessarily there will be an associated release of heat. Having seen the effect with my own eyes, the claims from a few that this is impossible, inconsistent with all known laws of nuclear physics, that these suggestions are in fact irrelevant.
Did that work?
We had a few little issues, but it was okay. We heard most of it, so I think we're fine.
Okay. Sorry that doesn't work quite so well over the net. I'll turn my fan back on now.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that doesn't bother you, does it? That fan? Let's keep the computer cool.
We're happy that your computer's cool and that you're cool.
Oh, okay.
That's the main thing.
That one usually is on. It's not all the time, but the other one is the Mac. Maybe I should turn that one off. Anyway, what the point is here is some interesting things that were established from this quote cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction incident, study. I love what he said at the end there. The fact that somebody says it's physically impossible is irrelevant because we saw it. It's just like 9/11. We saw the buildings turning to dust in midair. If somebody says it's impossible, well, that's irrelevant because the towers aren't there; they went away. it takes more than 5 times the Earth's output of energy to make towers go away. Well, are they still there? Now, obviously, there was enough energy of whatever mechanism was used. There was enough energy because the towers are gone. What that mechanism is left to be studied. Some parallel evidence that we've seen. The transmutation issue. The nuclear process. You know, I never said it was a nuke, but as I said from early on, I didn't rule out a nuclear process because it sure seems like that with the evidence that we see. You know, the all-important issue of helium makes you wonder, doesn't it? Remember the Bob and Bree image of the dust rolling out and then going up? And up and up? Right? It's as though that's at a particular point in the process. It isn't initially, but at a certain point it starts, doing that. These are just things that most people aren't aware of. You had a question?
No, I'm just listening in.
Okay. So here, let's compare the orders of magnitude of the various outputs of tritium. It's over on the right-hand side here. That's a logarithmic scale. When they did nuke testing, atmospheric nuke testing in the late 50s and early 60s, the fallout and precipitation into the Great Lakes, you get lots of more tritium. It's got a pretty short half-life, but in 1963 it was up here, and then in 1970 it's here, and then 1990 it's almost all gone. So it drops down. So looking at, and there's also nuclear plants that leak into the Great Lakes, except for Lake Superior. So that's why I use Lake Superior as kind of my datum. But here's the various values in the Great Lakes recently, and you can see Lake Superior is the lowest, because the other ones are getting pollution of some sort. Here's the yellow set is from the WTC at different days, day 4 and then day 11. And it's up to this magnitude. This is higher than it was in 1963 after nuke bomb tests. That's well above background levels. If you could call this background level down here, remember this is a logarithmic scale. It's like 50 times the background level. So there's something significant going on that produced tritium there. Now let's look in the little beaker of what they're doing with experiments with LENR, better known as cold fusion. It wasn't really fusion per se, but it was a nuclear process of sorts. They're 50 times more yet than the WTC. But then you look at the leaky nuke plants. That's what this is here. It's another thing altogether. So, let's see. Do you think they could have kept Chernobyl a secret?
I doubt it.
You can see right where it spread from and how it spread around the globe because of all of the fallout. If a nuke went off in New York City or a bunch of smaller nukes went off in New York City, do you think somebody around the world would have been saying, yo, we measured something? But that didn't happen. So let's look here at the relative amounts. So after 11 days at the WTC, that compared to that value, the Great Lake Superior has 1/50th of the amount. Instead of looking at the actual values, we're looking at the relative amounts. LENR, the cold fusion, is 50 times, but that's in a little beaker. What happens if you water it down with fire hoses and rain? We just look at the approximate orders of magnitude, and the leaky nuke plants, 18,000 times that. It's, several orders of magnitude even greater. So there's definitely something going on at the WTC. It's definitely above background levels. And to me, it seems like it's more in this, it's, something to look at there. So I'm going to look at about the so-called jumpers. Yeah, changing the topic a little bit. They're referred to as jumpers. I've come to say people left the building early, out the windows. I don't think that there are many of them, if any of them at all, chose to die. For whatever reason, they left the building early. So here's the plane-shaped hole here, that wingtip. Makes you kind of wonder how, if you have a silhouette of passage over here for a wing of a light bulb. But how do you get a slot like that? But anyway, here's floor 99, 102, 105. Then you go over here, and you have some people there and some people here and some people down there. I don't see any fumes coming out of their windows. But they're above here, and we had a woman standing in the hole down here, waving. So she wasn't cooked either. With white pants, it stayed white. So here's a close-up. And to me, it looks like this guy with the red arrows pointing at it. It looks kind of like he's taking his pants off. But in any case, he's hanging by one hand, 1 foot, while he's doing something with his other hand and foot. Hanging out there. And you start seeing other people hanging out. Sticking their face out. And then this guy looks like he's missing his pants here. And then it looks like this guy missing his shirt here. And, wait, does that make sense to you?
Well, only if, do you think that maybe they took it off to tie it to something so they could hang outside without falling, I guess, in hopes of getting some fresh air? I'm not sure.
That's the best possibility I've heard, is, that they're hanging on a rope tied to something inside, or using their clothing for that. I think it's like firefighters don't fight fires in the nude. They wear clothing to protect them from the fires, to be kind of a border. And so if there was a fire there, I'd want to have my clothes on. But it doesn't really look like, I don't see smoke coming out, and it can't be that hot because they can hang on with their hands. Like this guy looks like he's just looking over to see what those guys are doing next to him, but he's standing looks like he's standing on the windowsill looking over, chatting with them, wondering what they're going to do next maybe. If I were on the 105th floor and I was told there's fire there, first thing I'd do is head to the bathroom. I'd have extra clothing in my desk, and I'd wet it down, wrap it around my head, and then I'd head for the staircase. And I'd be wet. If the sprinklers kicked on, I'd be wet. If they didn't kick on, it was hot in there, it'd be sweating and I'd be wet. I can see a lot of reasons they'd be wet. Does that seem reasonable?
Right.
We can only guess. And, you ever heard of the active denial system for crowd control? They fire a microwave signal at a crowd, a bunch of protesters, to get them to break up, because it apparently makes the very top surface of their skin feel like they're frying and burning up. And it makes them, they can't. There's some videos on YouTube that show reporters, testing it, and they go 100, 200, and they head off. They just can't stand it because they feel like they're burning up and cooking. They're obviously not cooking. And one thing that hit me is about that audio that was released of Melissa Doy, a woman who was in the tower, and she's saying, I'm hot, I'm burning up, can't breathe, everyone's choking, I'm hot, I'm really... Wait, she never once choked, stuttered, she was just hyper. And I know that if you're in a hot tub, there's a limit to how long they let you stay in there, because your muscles get so relaxed, you get so hot you can't make your muscles work, because then you wouldn't be able to get yourself out. Same with saunas. And there's a occasion I remember I used to swim every morning, and the swim wear, they said swim at your own risk, because the fraternity was partying there the night before, jimmied with the thermostat and got it up to either 92 or 93 Fahrenheit. Now, oh great, I hate getting in cold water, this will be fun. I get in, I get halfway across the lane, down the lane, and I realize I'm in trouble. I'm heating up faster than I can dissipate the heat. So I just relaxed and rolled over on my back and tried to just kind of chill out. And somebody threw me a rope. And I remember wondering if it was worth it to reach over to get that rope. It was just so hard. It was like swimming in honey. You're definitely not hyper. I'm burning up, can't breathe. to me that seems more consistent with some kind of energy field that makes someone think they're burning up. Because if they're physically really hot, they would be lethargic. And so it's kind of weird. Do you realize there was around 1,200 people that left the building early out the windows?
Mm-hmm.
They're referred to as jumpers. The poor policemen, they're so geared to saving lives, and they were so helpless. And I think there's no worse feeling than feeling helpless. And watching these people come down, and there's one guy that wanted to go catch him, and his buddies had to keep a hold of him to make sure he didn't run out and try to catch a jumper. And so there's something weird going on. And in their 20-year career, many of them said they'd never seen someone jump, or they may have seen one person jump from a burning building, but that was it. And nothing, of course, the building this tall. If they're not jumping out of low-down buildings, why are they jumping out of high buildings? I mean, it's certain death. And it's something bizarre was going on there. And you don't really, these are open windows up here. If you don't have fumes coming out those windows, what's going on? And the windows that you see fumes coming out of, I don't see anybody hanging out those much. So there's something bizarre. And if this guy really has to take his pants off for who knows what reason, he's going to take his pants off. Let's assume there's smoke inside. Well, wouldn't you just take in a big deep breath, step inside, take the pants off, and then get back outside? Why take the pants off outside the building? If he's needing them to tie himself up, to hang out, but that is a good possibility for some clothes. But why would he be taking them off hanging out the window? He's pretty far out there. Looks like there might be somebody underneath him too. So it's bizarre. A lot of folks talk about thermite. Thermite's a welding material. But for some reason they like to talk about thermite. How do you make thermite? Well, let's see. What are the buildings made out of? Buildings are steel structures with aluminum cladding. If you grind up the steel, you get, and dissociate it, you're going to get iron powder, and it's going to rust pretty fast. So you get a bunch of rust. And the aluminum cladding, you grind that up, and you're going to get aluminum powder. So if you combine those two things, folks call that thermite. So a dustified building is going to give you the same ingredients as thermite. Kind of makes you wonder why the cover story is thermite. If it was thermite, there would be something else that's missing. Thermite, it makes heat, lots of heat. And there's something that was missing that day. Let's see if this works. We're going to see how they weld railroad tracks with thermite. You think something was missing on 9/11? That kind of goes for nukes as well. Things that are hot glow. And lots of nukes are going to make a whole lot of light. There was nothing like that we saw in 9/11. So how hot could you get it? That's what thermite does. Also what nukes do, they blind people by the light.
We have to be good at it.
That was just welding a railroad track there. Alright, let's do a summary. This is for people like charts. And we have all the various things here. We have cold direct energy weapon systems and hot direct energy weapon systems. Well, this did involve heat, so we can, ignore the hot part of it. And there's also kinetic energy, as well as thermal, but none of those fit what happened at 9/11. Of these things like low heat, unburned paper, low seismic impact, minimal debris, bathtub survives, material-specific effects, toasted cars at a distance, tritium, non-ionizing radiation, dustification. History and the future. We talked a little bit about, alluded to what happened to free energy in 1989, and we don't want that to happen again.
So we used to call it cold fusion all the time. But then there's what's commonly called cold fusion now, was so named by myself and a colleague at BYU, Paul Palmer.
When you hold that in your hand and you think back on what's happened these last 20 years, what do you think?
Wasted opportunity.
Wasted. Because it was discredited at the time.
He told us he has two regrets: calling the nuclear effect fusion, a name coined by a competitor,
If you loaded the cell with heavy water.
and having that news conference, something he says the University of Utah wanted.
So we used to call it cold fusion all the time. But then there's what's commonly called cold fusion now, was so named by myself and a colleague at BYU, Paul Palmer.
Turns out the person who coined the term cold fusion back in 1989, and it discredited true LENR by Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons, is also the person who rolled out the idea of thermite. Also the person who coined the term space beams in referring to my work. And it's amazing how those kind of terms really control public opinion. Just so simple things like that. Fusion or an illusion, the cover of Time magazine. And these guys really came upon something magnificent. You know the fellow in that video who said the fossil fuel era is about to come to an end. Shortly after that video, he was murdered. I think you know how that kind of thing goes.
Very interesting.
So we're going to look at this in 1989.
Is it a shortcut to fusion energy? I don't want to disappoint anyone. I think I'll read my lips answer here, and then I'll say, I think that'll become clear why I'm saying that. Can you read my lips on that back in the back? It says no. Energy is a long way off. That's why I say no. This is our result. It's just way off. I think a door that's open to us, but really a door on physics more than on energy. Geophysics in particular could be an interesting area.
Nothing to see here. Move along. And he took a vote. Let's vote down the work of Pons and Fleischmann. And he's lifting up his hand. He's holding his hand up. The guy next to him has a grin on his face, like it's funny. And he starts out holding his hand up. He's funded by the Department of Energy for like 20 years of his academic career. He gets his hand up, and how many people just blindly follow the leader and hold their hand up? Science by vote, not by evidence. And Steve Koonin is an interesting guy at Caltech next to him. He left Caltech in 2004 to work for British Petroleum. And then was appointed by Obama to be Undersecretary at the Department of Energy. Now some other characters down in the end, they're looking over. You see them looking there. They're thinking about raising their hand. Okay, up comes Koonin's hand. And then these other guys don't want to get left out. The guy in the end holds his pen up on the left-hand end. And these ones on the right, they don't want to miss out. They want to hold their hand up too. People just follow the lead. This is the groupthink aspect of it. And humans, all of us are susceptible to this to some level. And Johann Rafalski, I think, was the only one. He was the one that was giggling. Probably best that he didn't raise his hand for what they were doing. So we're going to just look at that again and just see how easy it was to cover up this work, to take a vote. So when people start taking a vote on science, everyone would say, what, science by vote? And here's the video of it. Just see how quickly they don't know what they're raising their hand for. Voting, science by vote. So let's have a vote. We're going to vote on the evidence here, right? Popularity of the evidence. Now, we don't vote against evidence, but I've got some questions. Are the towers gone? I see that, Julia.
Obviously, yes.
Okay. And also these other buildings were destroyed. Did the towers mostly turn to dust?
Yes.
Does there exist a technology that can turn a building to dust in midair?
I don't know, but I think so.
Otherwise, we have some difficulty. How do you explain something happening that was impossible to have happened? This is evidence that it's possible. We don't need to know the serial numbers of it or what the operator had for breakfast. We see the results. It's kind of like when the indigenous people of the northern hemisphere first met white man, and white man had this gizmo that fired a bullet through the air, a chunk of an arrow that could fly really fast and kill his brother. He didn't need to know how that weapon was made to know that such a weapon, he later would learn the term gun. He knows that exists because his brother got killed by this bullet, this flying metal arrow. But first, let's think about this picture here, and also the cover picture of my book. You know how you have to go to John Hutchison's lab to see it in action. Otherwise, you feel like you're just having to, blindly believe it. That's what it was before the year 2001. People would personally have to go there to see it, but now the whole world can know that such a technology exists if they open their eyes and look and can see, what happened is obviously possible because it did happen. That means that free energy technology exists. The technology used to dustify the buildings, that was an evil purpose it was used for. But think of the good purposes it can be used for, providing free energy to the world. That's why I say it's evidence of free energy technology. It's evidence of a technology that can be used to provide free energy for the world. Doesn't have to be used for evil purposes. And Charlie Pound, who did that song at the beginning and the video, also did them at the end about gatekeepers.
That makes me believe you've lost your
Just so folks that know, what I'm going to do at the end of the presentation is I'm going to play that video so that you can see it again. Okay? So just want to let you know.
People say history repeats, and they wonder why I'm, hammering this in so much. It doesn't need to repeat. If we're aware of the MO of how it has repeated, we have a choice. That choice is ours. And again, he who has controls the energy controls the people. And if we can control the energy, we aren't controlled. I think that's a good thing to remember.
It's been a long time of sitting. How are you doing, Julia?
I'm good. I'm listening to.
Good. Okay.
So the important thing is know what you know that you know, and know that everything else you don't know. And from this, we have these pieces of the puzzle that we know that we know that we know. And we have evidence of what happened on 9/11. We have parallel evidence. And there's, of course, a lot of questions. But we do see a lot of parallels in here. But what we do know is, like I said, towers didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground. They mostly turned into dust in midair. Therefore, we know a technology exists that can do that. And such a technology could be used for very good things instead of evil things. And also, we do see other things that have been put into use, as well as in nature, hurricanes and tornadoes. More parallel evidence and similarities to get a handle on what this technology can actually do and the kind of fingerprints it leaves behind. So we know there's a different kind of physics that exists than we've been taught in school. We're not taught how to curl up beams without breaking them. We're not taught how tornadoes work. So what questions have you?
Well, just trying to wrap my mind around it. So how exactly this could be done, or could have been done?
We know how, remember, first starting out with what happened. So we see what happened and how it happened. Well, we know how to reproduce it in, these other situations. We don't know, again, what the serial number is, where the equipment operator was located, what he had for breakfast, and various issues like that. But now, having been through this presentation, you look at that cover image, the bubbler. Does it mean something different now?
Well, I mean, it definitely still looks suspicious. It's just a lot of questions, definitely.
So as an engineer, how do you, I guess you look at it differently probably from a scientific point of view than from a human point of view. How do you see the science? Because that's something that kind of escapes a lot of people. How did you find that?
Well, that's the part that is still mind-boggling to me, because to understand something, I would have to try to understand how it could be done exactly, and I don't have a clear picture of that in my mind. I do see the possibilities, but not the final big picture as to exactly how this could be done. So that's an interesting thing to think about.
If how John Hutchison does his work is creates a static field. So I can never say this is exactly how it was because I wasn't in the room with the equipment operator. But what I can say is John Hutchison creates a static field, and within there interferes radio frequency signals. And similar thing that George Pigott did 100 years ago. Well, if you need a static field, guess what? There was one there. Miraculously, Hurricane Aaron. And we know there was a static field there because all 3 airports around Manhattan reported thunder that day. So we know that component existed. Whether it was used or not, I can't prove that, but it was there. Also, this creates a question. Remember the Bob and Bree video, how the dust went up? Suddenly went up and up and up. And that issue about the nuclear production, putting out a fingerprint of nuclear reaction, showing helium. We weren't there to sample the air, but we see the dust going up, which is consistent with that. Like it was a certain part in the whatever process it was, the dust suddenly went up. They quit rolling out. Something caused it to go up.
Yes, very interesting. Just the sheer scale of it is what boggles the mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the audacity. I guess that's, I think, the part that people have a hard time with because it happened in front of our eyes. And for me, that's the part that is the hardest to wrap one's mind around. Although I've seen things happen in my life where you didn't think it was going to happen and it did. But to me, it's just this idea of everyone watching the same thing around the world. And that this cover story was created, airplanes going into the building, which, how do you feel about the original story now?
Well, I mean, the original story was always troubling for me because a lot of things obviously don't add up with it, so I still don't buy into the official story, that's for sure. There's a lot of things that are not making the full picture, but we're just seeing pieces of the puzzles where, it's hard to tell what the picture is in its entirety.
Mm-hmm. What pieces of evidence did you find most interesting and compelling?
Well, the temperatures, then the glow instead of the fires, and just the way the metal reacted, just all this things that were definitely out of the ordinary.
Let's look at what we can rule out. Can you rule out wrecking ball having destroyed the building, or a missile, something physically hitting the building?
Well, I mean, for what had happened, the way it all went up to dust, that obviously is not what caused it. Yes.
And how about bombs, like TNT, or even big nuke bombs, or lots of little nuke bombs?
It didn't look like bombs.
How about a welding material that would cause things to melt?
Well, they didn't melt either.
So I think we can rule out kinetic energy and thermal energy.
Pretty much.
So what kind is left?
I'm not completely sure because it seems like there were more than one type of reaction going on. So I
know when John Hutchison produces this, he gets all of the effects that we saw, in what he does with the static field and interfering radio frequency signal. And depending on the shape of the wave and the relative strength, it gets different effects, but it's all from doing the same thing. And that list of all of the different things, like, you saw the aluminum peeling, and then he gets things that dustify, he gets things that levitate, dissimilar materials bonding together, things that glow without heat. This is that long list of things, and all of those things we saw. And there's one thing that really got to me, that bothered me the most when I started reading up on Hutchison's work, is that the more mass involved, the less it would be self-quenching, less the reaction would be self-quenching, that it might continue to go on.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge issue. So for somebody who's, you've got all sorts of different perspectives because you're from a different country as well. I mean, that's another thing. I think there's you've been involved in a really patriotic, what you were doing with the Department of Homeland Security was out of a sense of patriotism after 9/11. So how does this mesh with all those feelings that you have around 9/11?
Well, from everything I've seen, it doesn't seem to be a real concern about the so-called terrorism, other than it being used as a cover to create money-making opportunities for corporations. So that's definitely changed my perspective after seeing it from within. So,
well, for people that don't know about your story, can you just, for people that are listening right now, can you just give them a quick overview? I know we did that yesterday, but there might be other people that are listening today. Maybe just let them know what you were doing after 9/11 and what your response was.
When I was working for Homeland Security, we had specific alerts to be on the lookout for terrorists trying to come in through the U.S.-Mexico border. And when I had reported entries on the exact date when we were expecting it to happen, instead of Homeland Security, looking into the shortcomings of security on the border, they had attacked me and tried to silence me using a blackhawk helicopter and a 27-man SWAT team and false imprisonments and all these legal matters that also involved deaths of 4 witnesses. And eventually we were forced in a position where we had to sue Homeland Security to our names and prove this, wrongdoing and what is really being done in the name of Homeland Security. So that definitely changed my perspective about the priorities of what the government is doing. Because if the terrorism was really such a priority, it would be treated in a different way. It seems like they just don't want to have anyone who is exposing that the system really isn't working and really isn't all that concerned with fighting terrorism. So they're more interested in that than fighting the so-called terror threat.
I fully agree with you from what I've seen. There's something Jesse Ventura said that was spot on. So I'll put it off on him. That the cattle lines at the airports that you wait to get frisked through. You wait in these long lines. How many people are going through those lines? And they're worried about somebody having a bomb on a plane that's going to take out 300 people. There's more than 300 people in that cattle line waiting to go through the security check. And Jesse Ventura had suggested that, well, if somebody wanted to take out a bunch of people, you can take out 500 people right there. They don't even wait to go through, to get on the plane. But that so it isn't something that really happens.
One of the things that you were talking about, Dr. Judy, before we went on air at the very beginning was the hijacking issue. and you were just discussing that with Julia before we went on. So could you maybe mention that?
My age is showing here. In the 70s, you talk about that, the FMS, the Flight Management System. Yeah, in the 70s, I remember, thinking back, wait, we had like a hijacking a week. I thought, no, that can't be. And I went and looked it up, and it was either 50 or 51 hijackings, domestic hijackings in the U.S. in the year of 1974. My golly, my memory is right. And it was just like an everyday thing. These people were wanting to go to Cuba. The majority of them were. And hijackings were so common that the funniest one I remember is this guy who wanted to go to Minneapolis. All the flights were booked going to Minneapolis, so he got a ticket going to San Francisco. And then halfway through the flight, he hijacked it to Minneapolis, where he wanted to go. It was just so commonplace. It was kind of like getting the bus driver to drop you off on your street. And then they suddenly stopped. Like, we don't really remember, after, like, the end of the 70s, they tapered off, and then they almost came to complete stop. Essentially came to a complete stop. And something that few people realize is the 10 years prior to 9/11, you know how many hijackings, domestic hijackings there were in the U.S.? Zero. Yep, 0. And there was very few before then. It turns out they're retrofitting all the planes up to like 1981, 82, 83, when the Boeing 757 and 767 were the first planes that rolled off the assembly line with the flight management system as standard equipment. And the line in the brochure was something like from shortly after takeoff until and through landing, they could control the plane. And the domestic flights are always within, I wouldn't say earshot, radar shot of a tower. And so if somebody's breaking into the cockpit, the pilot just types in the hijack code, and now the nearest tower is flying the plane, and it's totally out of control of the pilot or hijacker. Nobody can fly it except the tower, because the people in the plane are locked out. And I kind of joke and say, okay, then the pilot gets on his walkie-talkie and intercom tells the passengers, we have a slight mechanical problem, nothing to worry about, folks, and they just be landing at the next nearest airport, and they land, and a paddy wagon pulls up alongside the plane, they pull the thug out, and then they take back off again. But, hijackers, know this. There's no point in trying to hijack a plane. So it comes to question. Now, other countries have bought the Boeing 757 and 767, and of course they might want to take the electronics. I think Lufthansa took the electronics out of their cockpit because they don't want U.S. Towers being able to fly their planes, being able to control their planes, and it's mainly for the U.S. But in the history of Boeing 757 and 767, there's only been one hijacking. That was a Boeing 767 run by Ethiopian Airlines. And the pilot ended up running out of fuel, and then he ditched it in the ocean. Right off the beach is a honeymooning couple that got a nice video of it that is probably still on YouTube somewhere, where the plane came down, it had run out of fuel, and the wind clipped the water and just completely tore the plane apart. But some people survived. They got to the shore. It was like, it was within swimming distance of the shore. And of course, people went out in rescue boats and got the people. It was like 52 people that survived, or 53, something like that. But that's the only Boeing 757 or 767, without, arguing about 9/11, the only ones outside of that's ever been hijacked, and that was not a domestic flight. There have been no domestic hijackings of the 757 or 767, and you know how many there are in existence? Quite a few. Just statistics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty amazing, actually, when you think about it. And the other thing that you both have in common, I think, was the aspiration or the interest in NASA. And so I think that, aircraft in and of themselves. So, because your area is electronics, isn't it, Julia?
Yes, aviation and aircraft engineering.
Right, and I think you had aspirations to work at NASA. So that I thought was kind of an interesting fact. I mean, it's interesting for me anyway, because I remember that era, but something.
I want to be an astronaut. Yeah. I was going to be an astronaut.
Well, both of you had the same aspirations, which is kind of interesting because I didn't know that before I met Julia. So, yeah, you have that in common. Two women who are engineers and want to be astronauts in the same room.
I'm guessing it might be the same thing about just, curious about our world. Is that what it is?
Must be. Probably so.
Mm-hmm. I think about, like, if you're in orbit looking down on the planet, what would it look like? What would weightlessness be like?
Mm-hmm. And actually, you had a little stint at NASA yourself early on in your career, so you didn't quite get up there in the atmosphere, but
right. Also at Boeing Aerospace in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Briefly.
So you guys had an intersection there too. I have a couple of questions from people who are listening, and they are curious about a couple of things. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions?
Go ahead. Are we still on you have a different image up, or is that my screen still up?
We still have the screen up. The beautiful screen of the beautiful book.
Okay.
The justification.
The
frothing book, yeah.
The frothing building.
There's a couple of questions about the bathtub walls. How thick were the bathtub walls? That was one of them.
I don't remember. There's different thicknesses, different places. There's various tie downs that went in, and they did somewhat depend on as we saw the parking garage they left in there when they cleaned out the area for stability. And so if you didn't have that inside the bathtub, and you were driving these mega cranes right next to the wall, you're putting a lot of force down. It started moving the wall, and that's when they went, whoops, we got to have new rules about moving the earth-moving equipment around.
Right. Mhm. Yeah. So kind of interesting, considering that they supposedly had a couple of over 1 million tons of debris that fell. They're worried about some trucks.
It supposedly slammed to the ground, but
yeah. So were there other bathtubs, for example, west of West Street?
West of West Street is, I don't know what that infill is like that's under the WFC buildings. I think there is a wall there, and they were worried about that wall, like up by Battery City Park or wherever, the green grass that stayed green the whole time. That wall up there, they're kind of worried about, but it wasn't affected.
Okay. There's a question about the fireman who disappeared in, was it Building 6? I'm trying to get back to that question.
Oh, Building 3. No, he didn't disappear. The hallway disappeared behind him. Oh, there's one in Building 3. There's firefighters were leaving the Tower 1. They went through the lobby of Building 6, and his one guy remained. His other buddies were just out of arm's reach, out in the middle, and suddenly he said everything went dark. And when he finally saw some sunlight, his buddies were gone. He knew they were gone. He was right at the edge of that big hole, and he had, survivor's guilt, and was just totally in a daze. Those other guys just, goners. Mm-hmm. In the wrong place, the wrong time.
Okay. People are asking you to hypothesize. They're saying, can we coax her to hypothesize? But I don't think we can coax you to hypothesize.
If we can talk about, a parallel story, parallel evidence, but not. I don't like to mix it in with this.
Right.
You can say what's possible and what's not possible about something, parallel to that.
Okay. Then I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. Maybe you can do that. But can you repeat how the radial holes came from above?
Oh, I don't know that they came from above.
Mm-hmm. That's what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah. One might think they came from above, but we don't have any evidence of that at all. And then when you look at John Hutchison's work, it's like he's got this, cylindrical cutout in the middle of his not in the middle, but parallel to the surface, but within a solid bar of aluminum. that, how do you get a drill in there and do that? And so it's as though there's if you imagine a line in space around which, at a radial distance, everything testifies. So there's something going on in there, and it's like a radial distance from that line. Not necessarily that there's a post hole digger cutting something out. And in Hutchison's sample, it's parallel to the axis of the aluminum bar. Mm-hmm. But it kind of looks like a similar type of thing going on with Building 6. Looks like a bunch of cylindrical cutouts. Not that something physically did that, but maybe, how lightning bolts go between the cloud and the ground, whatever path. Maybe there's some other thing going on where it's, some vertical thing that goes on, and it's at a radial distance from those lines. It just testifies. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying where anything's coming from, and for people who have difficulty with that, again, I have a parallel story. Most people have cell phones. Julia, do you have a cell phone?
Of course.
Oh, I don't, but I assume most people do. When you make a call, do you know what cell phone tower you're connecting to and where it is?
No.
You just know that your cell phone works. And if you're out driving around and go around a corner out in the middle of some canyon, and then it quits working, you know that's a spot where it doesn't work. But as long as it works if you're within the reach of the tower. And that's a similar analogy to these kind of field effect, like what John Hutchison does. He creates a static field, and within that interferes a radio frequency signal. So any place within that static field where he chooses to interfere a radio frequency signal, that's where the stuff happens. Like a cell phone, someplace within reach of the cell phone tower, if you have a working cell phone and the tower reaches within this region, it works.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, just on that note, can you explain the difference? There's kinetic energy, there's thermal energy, and then there's directed energy. Are those really the three types of energy that there are?
The three main ones that I think. Kinetic energy is like when something physically hits something else, or a bullet or a missile. That's something physically hitting something, or something explodes, bomb explodes, and chunks go flying. They typically stay chunks until they land someplace. They fly and stay as pieces until they land. They might get busted up more when they land, but chunks go flying. Something hits something else. A wrecking ball. You swing a wrecking ball at a building to knock it down. You're damaging it with kinetic energy. Thermal energy, like you cook it. You melt it, heat it up, fire. Something that creates heat, and the heat bothers the material, disrupts the material. Directed energy is energy that, my definition of it is like, I guess, the Russian definition. Not necessarily the conventional definition, but energy that's directed. And it's a direct energy weapon if it's used as a weapon. So it's directed energy that's used as a weapon. And what I mean by directed energy, it's direct as in given instructions, it's directed to do something that it normally doesn't do, normally that we don't see it doing. And it's also directed geographically. Don't go across the street, just buildings with a WTC prefix. And so it is, I think you have to admit that whatever was done was directed in some way. But also the directed as in giving instructions to. If you look at it, these molecules were attracted to each other, normally attract each other. You have solids. And it looks like
Oops. You still there, Julia?
Yes, I am.
Good. Okay, well, we'll get Dr. Judy back. I'm just gonna, there you go. Are you back again?
Oh, did I go away?
You went away.
Oh dear.
No, just for a second. It's not bad, but, anyway, well, if you want to, can you just recap what you just said?
Let's see, where did we leave off? I was talking about energy that was directed and used as a weapon.
Right, okay.
And it's directed geographically, as in, WTC 7, but not the post office right across the street. And also directed as in giving instructions to it. if you see the tipping top of Tower 2, remember how it tipped? Oh, that's another thing that Julia might not be aware of. Remember how the top of Tower 2 tips, and then it looks like it stops tipping and almost tips back a little bit. And then it just, poof, turns to dust. And people say, oh, that's violating the laws of physics. Well, the conservation of momentum, angular momentum. And I decided, after looking at it, that it doesn't if the building turns to dust. It's no longer a rigid object, so it's no longer rotating as a rigid object, but each little speck of dust is now rotating. So it's maintaining conservation of angular momentum, but it's just not rotating as a rigid body.
Oh, that's clear to me. That's an interesting way of describing it, because we that don't take science classes as a regular thing, most of us can understand that concept, I think.
Yeah, as a rigid body, it looks like it stops rotating, but if each little speck in it is continuing to rotate, it can maintain the laws of physics as we know it, of conservation of angular momentum. But what it does is proves the building's turning to dust. Because that's the only way your equation works. But also, if you look at when that tipping top just starts to tip, right at around the hinge point where it starts to tip, all this dust comes squirting out, frothing out. And when I saw that, we had this big discussion going on. People were saying, "Oh, of course there's high heat," and I say, "No, you can't have high heat with all this water, because you'd have a steam explosion." And that's because water, when it becomes steam, it needs 1,600 times the volume. It just needs more space, like more elbow room. So if it suddenly needs more space, when water becomes steam, it explodes. And that's actually what caused the damage at Chernobyl. The explosion was a steam explosion. But I was thinking about that, and that was on my mind, and was thinking, wait a minute, this looks like the building, the solid matter, is sort of turning to building steam, the equivalent of that, or the analogy to that, where the molecules, instead of being tightly connected to each other, are now needing more space between each other, and they suddenly repel each other.
Oh, okay.
And that, imagine if you could tell the atoms, instead of to spin one direction, stop and reverse and go the other direction. Something might suddenly come apart. That's just hypothesizing over someplace else. But what we do see is that suddenly solids are now frothing up into dust.
Huh. So does that make sense to you, Julia, the other scientist in the room?
Definitely gives me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot of stuff to swallow in at one time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess probably the next step is to read the book, so that you can take over.
That's what I was about to say. That I need to read the book to completely soak it all in and have the dots connect in my mind as well. So I look forward to reading the book for sure.
There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, and what I like is that even for people like me who don't look at the equations, I looked at the equations, but it would be very difficult for me to go through them. But for someone who understands, the equations are all there, and all the citations are there, and all the footnotes, and everything has been completely. It's all verifiable, and you can find out all sorts of the source materials and that sort of thing, which I find really interesting about reading the book, because she's gone through everything with a fine-tooth comb. Everything's cited.
There's no videos in the book, but there's on the screen that I'm showing that last link at the bottom, and it's also that link's available through the book website, the far right-hand end. That link is there, where I have videos available just for convenience for each chapter in the book, and they're located that way because in case one goes missing, I can replace it with another one. But there's different aspects, so you could see videos if you wanted to of different things, including the psychological thing is psychology experiments like the Asch conformity experiment, where there's different lines, and they call it a visual perception experiment. And there's only one guy there who's really a test subject. The rest are in on it. But that guy thinks that everybody else is being tested too, and they show him which line matches these other three. And the right answer is 2, and so they all go around there and say 2. And then the next test, the right answer is 1, and they all start saying 3, and they get up to this guy, and he says 3, and he's real, whatever the right answer is, he says the right answer, he's real uncomfortable if it doesn't match the other ones. And then next time, he goes ahead and joins them. If they're saying the wrong answer, he doesn't know why, but he just joins them. It's kind of like that Science by Vote press conference where they all just joined in, raised their hand. It's what humans tend to do. They want to conform. Yeah. I'd like to point out about the truck. Something else I didn't point out about the flying trucks from the tornadoes in the area in Dallas last spring. If you think about it, whatever weight these trucks are, what's the terminal velocity? How fast does that air have to be moving up from underneath to send the truck upward? And where does that air come from? If you think it was just wind blowing the trucks up in the air, but you find the trucks were just going straight up. They weren't like blowing horizontally, and they didn't look to be in a visual funnel cloud. And we also didn't see dumpsters going up, just trucks on rubber tires. Imagine that. Right. So anybody that's out there that has figured that out already about the grounding situation, will get that. And with Hutchison's work, you get lift or disruption. You tend to get one or the other. So we saw in 9/11, you got flipped cars or toasted cars. But not both. Yeah, they tend not to be both. Mm-hmm. And also we noticed that when one, of the one axle, like the rear axle, if the rubber tire's gone, once those wheels drop down to the ground, that car's pretty well grounded, and it doesn't continue toasting. Mm-hmm. So the person that was asking the question about the bathtub walls didn't hear the answer. So can you just quickly repeat what you said about the bathtubs west of West Street and the thickness of the bathtub walls? Oh, I don't know the exact thickness offhand, but they had various tie downs and so forth when they were building them. But they also had supports inside the bathtub, like that's what the various parking garages were. It was a stability for the inside of the bathtub because they had the ground on the outside. And when they started moving the earth moving equipment in, without the inside of the bathtub being supported, you're pushing down on the ground and it starts pushing the wall inward. And that's when they were having a problem. They realized, we got to build these wooden platforms to distribute out the load and not let the over X amount of weight get within Y distance from the wall and so forth. And so they had rules with that. Now across the street, they added the World Financial Center, the WFC buildings across the street afterwards, after they built the towers. And they have a different wall over there. And I'm not that as familiar with the underground there, but I do know it by Battery Park. That green grass we saw near Bob and Bree's apartment that stayed green. There's a wall around there where the land control has been extended the land out further. And that wall, I think they were concerned about it at one point, but it ended up being okay. They say awesome. It was awesome that it was just that you clean out the bathtub and it's still there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they're thankful that you're answering their question for them. It was one that they had. And the biggest damage was from the earth moving equipment moving around the ground, around the sides of the bathtub before they, realized what was going on. Not the 1 million tons of building that slammed down to it. That supposedly slammed down on it. Yeah, that's one of the ones that I found really odd. That from Building 6. Mm-hmm. Oh, I actually have that video on my Towers video series where the guy says in a southern accent, "Getting ready to pull Building 6," and he explains how they have the cable tied to the building because they're afraid of damaging the bathtub. That's why they can't use dynamite to bring down that, that westerly stub of Building 6 that remained because it's right next to the bathtub wall. So they use cables and some earth-moving equipment to pull the cables, some grapplers, to pull it down. They rocked it back and forth and just pulled pieces down. Kind of interesting.
after all that other stuff supposedly fell down. But these are the things that seem to be just obvious if you look into them. I guess you've done all the legwork in looking into all this stuff. It's easy for me to say, but you've really, I always use this analogy, but you're like the snowplow that kind of goes ahead of us so that we get to have all this information. And you did all the work, but I mean, sending away for all this information, I don't think people realize exactly what that involves, but maybe you can mention, like the seismic graphs, for example. I found that interesting.
Yeah, they only let you have so much at a time, and you justify it and so forth for getting that data. Those long charts I have for like a month's worth even, and the magnetometer as well. Someone's going to say something?
I was just going to ask you to say how you what the process was behind. Figuring out that you needed them and then getting them.
I just would go with, just looking at the data, and as I say, to look at the data, and the data tells you what happened. My favorite quote, somebody else's statement actually, empirical evidence is the truth that theory must mimic. Not the other way around. The evidence is always the truth, and a lot of my expertise is in material characterization, determining the properties of new materials that we've never seen before, or we've never seen the properties before. And so I came up with this phrase that I use, if you listen to the evidence carefully enough, it will speak to you and tell you exactly what happened. If you don't know what happened, keep listening to the evidence until you do. The evidence always tells the truth. The key is not to allow yourself to be distracted away from seeing what the evidence is telling you. So it's careful, especially, we know this was some kind of a psychological operation. And in such a situation, it's ever so important to not walk down the garden path, but to look at what you know that you know that you know and why you know it. Establish, and that's what I was being very careful with in this presentation. It's like, here are things that we know that we know. And I'm not speculating beyond that. I know how we can reproduce it. Let's say we could do the exact same thing. It's like saying you have a bullet hole in somebody. And you see that somebody has a gun that shoots. You can't say, well, a gun caused that, unless you actually have more evidence to show that a particular gun caused that. You say, this is a bullet hole. I know how to make such a hole. I can make one over here with this gun. Boom. So it's parallel evidence. And it's so easy to say, well, this was it, or you match one detail. And like finding aluminum powder and iron oxide. And say, those ingredients of thermite. Well, it's like saying, how does that prove anything what happened to the buildings? That's just one detail. You have that in your dust baggie. Well, if you turn the buildings to dust, or the majority of the buildings to dust in midair, that's what you'd have in a dust baggie. So why are you concluding that it was the thermite had something to do with it? Because that's something that's it's a welding material. It gets hot. It's blinds people with the light. So you have to look at, just instead of be so quick to be pattern matching like a multiple choice test. Because what happens if it's something else?
Right. Yeah, it's not on the test, but we're so used to that multiple choice option, that it's either A, B, or C, but we don't think of the fact that it might be something else. So we've been conditioned in this way to not think outside of that box. And people talk about not thinking outside the box, but really that's what we're all doing when we think that it's something that we've already seen before and we can't imagine it being something else.
Like how quick people are to say, well, I heard an explosion, so therefore that absolutely proves that there were bombs in the building. And so let's quit looking at anything else. The cover-up is safe then.
I have a question, another question here. What are the red-gray, just a sec, what are the red-gray chips that A&E says are unreacted thermite? I mean, it's another one of those thermite questions, isn't it? But do you know about that?
Well, how do you know it's unreacted thermite? How do you know, what it was in the building? I mean, there's lots of things that can make red and gray chips. If you have, iron oxide, not very well mixed with, the aluminum powder, iron oxide, that's rust. It's going to be red, and the aluminum powder is going to be gray, so you have red and gray chips. I mean, you can, just because you have red and gray chips, you've been led to believe it means something in particular. If you had thermite in there, I won't whip out my audio, but imagine that Blinded by the Light tune.
We could sing it for them.
Oh, yeah.
Blinded by the light. There you go. That's my version.
All right. Let me read something from my book. It might be helpful. The buildings were turned to dust. Mostly turned to dust, and therefore dust would be expected to contain traces of all materials that were in the buildings. Finding traces of chocolate, sugar, and nano wheat, flour, in the dust would not prove that chocolate chip cookies turned the buildings to dust. It wouldn't even prove that these ingredients had been combined as chocolate chip cookies in the buildings, or that such cookies were even capable of turning buildings to dust. The same is true for thermite. Finding constituents of the building in the dust does not give a proof of what caused, what happened to the buildings. In this case, focusing on particular constituents found in the dust and claiming that those constituents support a particular theory may actually distract away from the central and incontrovertible fact that most of the buildings and its contents were quite simply turned to dust. Mm-hmm. Remember about looking at what the evidence is telling you and not being distracted away from what the evidence is telling you. The biggest piece of evidence, I would say, is the buildings were mostly turned to dust. Thermite can't do that.
No, it can't. I have a question about the surfer. The person who surfed down supposedly on somebody thought that it was a myth. Can you tell us a little bit more? Is his name Pascal?
That's the guy who came forward saying that he was the surfer. And I have no reason to doubt him. I mean, I wasn't there watching him, but his story matches what I've witnessed in the evidence. He was in stairwell B, above where those firefighters were. And he survived, although the building around him didn't. And there's a coworker of his that also survived. She was actually the last person pulled out. I think it was at the 27-hour mark. And she was pinned, her arm was pinned under something. And she was above where he was. And it was something like the 21st floor, something like 15 stories he went down. And he described, what his situation. He was showing, and I saw him in a video showing how he was hunkered down when the building started coming apart. And he looked like he was, he was in stairwell B, but he had his hands against the baseboard of the metal baseboard of the stairway. Kind of like he was grounded to it. But it's quite possible that he could survive, and also if there's some anti-gravity involved, I know that term sounds scary. If there's some weightlessness, you saw how those trucks were, the flying trucks last spring in the tornado, that they didn't really crash land that hard. And there have been people picked up by tornadoes who are gently set down. So if you have a similar type thing going on, it's understandable that it's possible. It's weird, but it's possible that he could be set down on top of the stairwell. He was right above where those firefighters were.
I think there's a video, isn't there? Did you mention that?
Yeah, there's several videos in which he's talking about it. This last September 11th, they bring out all the new various interviews. There's a bunch of them on him. And I don't doubt his story. I feel sorry for him because he's going to be attacked by all sorts of people.
It took him a while to come forward, didn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you'd experienced that, I think he's also a structural engineer. Wouldn't you kind of wonder about who's going to live? They're all going to say I'm a crazy case, and you wouldn't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of the first responders who felt that way too, and many of them, or quite a few of them, have gotten my book, and I didn't know who it was or in the book or whatever, and they've then contacted me and thanked me and thanked me and thanked me. It gave them some sanity. It's like that's just what they experienced.
Oh, that's interesting. Because you're really doing this, for everybody that was involved as well. I think that there's a lot of reasons why you wrote the book, but
their expertise is in saving people in fires. The firefighters, their expertise is not in material analysis, materials characterization, and interferometry and things like that, and mechanics and structural engineering. So with my background, I'm able to see these things very easily. And I'm also more geared to observing material behavior in images and thinking about how things are. And if people aren't geared to that, they don't necessarily see that. If they would know what to do in an emergency situation a lot faster than I would, because I'm busy analyzing it.
Well, there's one more question I'm going to ask, then we'll probably just wrap up the question part. But does Dr. Wood, did you observe the white smoke coming from the base of WTC-2 before it was justified?
Oh, there was lathering up of a lot of the buildings before they went poof, the final going poof. And actually, in Building 1, there was a firefighter, a newbie. His is called probies. It's his first day on the job as a firefighter, and he's supposed to stick with his boss. And at one point they stopped, and somebody said, drop everything and get out of the building. And he dropped everything, and then it continued on, and he didn't have his Scott tank and his face mask, and his boss said, "Where's your face mask?" And he said, "Well, you said to drop everything." And he took him literally because he's supposed to do what he's told. And so he then was sent out of the building, and he's going down the stairs by himself, and he gets down to the third floor, and he's describing this opaque air, this super thick dust. And he knew it wasn't smoke because he could breathe. Smoke takes the oxygen out of the air. He could breathe, but it was just thick with dust, like the building was turning to dust. And he got out of the building and got out between buildings 5 and 6, and that's when the North Tower went poof. So he was witnessing this white dustification. And some people would call it smoke. You call it fumes, lather. I tend to stay with words that don't have the same. Smoke. We're assuming fire is the cause. If you keep it with some generic term but be consistent, you can identify phenomena. This is actually much more scientific. You can identify phenomena without being biased.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I lost my chat there for a minute. Oops. I think we might be off air now, actually, as it turns out. For some reason, actually, I guess, did you just switch screens?
I didn't.
Oh, okay. The screen went from screen sharing.
Because you dropped off, the screen sharing shut down.
Oh, okay. There you go. I must have had just a little lapse there. Anyway, that's fine. I think we're still, let me just check in and see if we're still live. I think what I'll do is, I'm going to ask you a question anyway, so I'm going to go to a video, and then I'm just going to ask Julia something, and I'll check and see if we're still live. I'm just reconnecting here. Okay. Let me see what's happened there. Okay. Very strange. Okay. Just going to do a little something here.
Ooh, it's a feedback looper.
Yeah, that's very strange.
Is Julie still there?
Yes, I am.
Well, you guys talk amongst yourselves for just a second.
Talk amongst yourselves.
That's right.
I can't do that accent. But
talk amongst yourselves. Have some coffee. Talk.
What are your favorite? Let me put a qualifier to that. This is a horrible scene, but it ends up not being so traumatic when you just start looking at the physical things and this is interesting, oh, this is interesting, and you're able to kind of tune out the horror of the scene. And that's what I mean. What are your favorite pieces of evidence? The most intriguing?
Well, they're all very intriguing. It'd be hard to pick just one. It's just the totality of it all, how it doesn't add up together. It's hard to wrap your mind around it.
Yeah, I think that is true. Yeah, and if it's something you've never seen before, I think that's difficult for a lot of people to understand something if they've not seen it before.
We're back on the air, so just in case you want to just continue on, just a little debrief here, and then we're going to wrap things up for tonight. Okay. So if you want to ask Julie, are there any other questions that you have about the presentation? Some of the things that people have been asking in the chat.
Well, my main focus right now is just to read the book and get all the details in my mind. And but there was great, a lot of great visuals that are definitely very alarming.
So that's I think a good word for it. It's very alarming if you haven't seen it before. So I'm going to. When are you going to be? You're going to be coming out with another movie, I think, aren't you? Is that a scoop, or are you able to talk about that or not?
Well, we have quite a few things in the works, but we're in process of writing the screenplay. If you're referring to the 9/11 movie, but we're still working on things in preparations. But I'll definitely give you heads up once that is closer to moving forward. So that's a work in progress still. A lot of work to be done since it's not going to be moving in the same venue as we originally thought, since there were too many misrepresentations involved, and but we are still definitely advocates for finding out what really happened in 9/11. So there's still a lot more research to be done, which now includes, in my world, reading Dr. Wood's book as well.
Without any proof, you didn't hear it, you didn't see it, you never heard it, not a word of it. You won't see nothing to no one, never tell a soul what you know is the truth.